William Bartram, portrayed by Mike Adams, will describe the discovery of the beautiful Bartram Ixia. Mike, or Billy, you're on.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Billy Bartram at your service this afternoon. We're going to be opening this conference, this symposium this year with a presentation on the Bartram's Ixia. Those of you that have been Bartramites for a while, you know about this plant. It's quite amazing indeed. What I want to show you here this afternoon is kind of like my mode of transportation as I'm exploring the waterways, particularly the St. Johns River, right out here, and you see my method of transportation here. All kinds of boats. This particular boat you see is loaded with my gear. I have a plant press there and a sketchbook right there on my lap. You see I even have a canine companion. My friend Job would appreciate that. And there's other miscellaneous supplies. There's a crate in the front. There's some plant samples in the stern of the boat. And if you look at this piece of artwork, there's a lot of things happening there. In the upper left, you see some birds flying in the background over that waterway, probably ibises. Now, I don't know how many of you have taken a look at my book, Travels, published around 1791, but I was documenting more than just plants. I was looking at animals and birds and interacting quite successfully with Native Americans, I might add. And then you look towards the middle of the slide there, looks like some kind of a raccoon or fox. So there's all kinds of things happening on this slide. There's even a few mushrooms down in this corner. And then some of you that don't know, and for those of you that do know, this would be a wonderful review, but the red line is the travel. Came down from Philadelphia in the Pennsylvania colony, went to Charlestown, down through a village called Savannah in the Georgia colony, followed the Savannah River north, past the village of Augusta, up into the foothills of the Appalachians to a place called Buffalo Lick. An interesting name of a place. Animals like to lick the soil in this particular area for minerals and salts and that type of thing. Back down, continued on, down through the Georgia colony to a place that's near Darien, Georgia today, the Altamaha River. Some of you may have heard of it. There's a very famous plant that was discovered there, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment. Down into the Florida Peninsula, East Florida Territory, over west towards Cuskawilla, the Paynes Prairie today. I called it the Great Alachua Savannah. If you read Travels, you might see a map in there that I drew of the Alachua Savannah. It was quite an amazing place, the largest and the most numerous alligators I had seen besides the St. Johns River. Speaking of alligators, we've been able to bring in some of my original artwork in here for you to look at this afternoon. So in between presentations and at the end, you're welcome to look around. This particular image is right over there on the wall, and we're going to be having an amazing alligator presentation a little later. Mine is just really an introduction. But when people first started seeing this sketch, they were thinking, do alligators really do those positions? Look at those positions with the head raised up, fire and smoke coming out of the nostrils, the arched back, the tail up out of the water. And look at that alligator on the top, holding his head up with a fish flapping about in his jaws. I saw all that right out here in the St. Johns River. And then I added some little decorative landscape features on this as well. Because a lot of my sketches, I have to confess to you, I actually finished up in the Philadelphia Herbarium where my father John has his gardens and herbarium. So not all these sketches were finished out in the field. A lot of them were drawn from my notes in the journal. Now, I was talking about the Altamaha River area near the village of Darien in southeast Georgia. This is one of the plants I was encountering. Quite a specimen indeed. And my father and I, John, we were exploring the Altamaha River, and we actually became disoriented for a while. And we were finding some of these things while we were disoriented. So it was quite serendipitous that we got lost, if you will, and we were still able to find these amazing plants. This is the fever bark. And then there's these magic boxes that people use in modern times that capture images like that. That's what this one is on the right here. You can see that my artwork is very close. And as I mentioned, I did the coloration primarily back at the gardens. I didn't do the colorations while out in the field. That's what it looks like, a shrub, a low shrub, if you will, in the habitat setting. Now, this is the one that I really like to talk about, the Franklinia. This was one that my father and I discovered when we first came through in 1766 along the Altamaha River there, and we accidentally came up on this plant. Didn't do anything with it at the time other than kind of make a mental note of it. And when I came back on my own travels in 1774, my father asked me to collect specimens and seeds, and that's what I did. For those of you that know a little bit of botany, you see it has a close resemblance to the loblolly bay, a really close resemblance. And for all practical purposes, in modern times, this plant will be extinct. That would be the only known population there along the Altamaha River. And this is a picture of my father's house at the Philadelphia Herbarium. In the foreground there is an actual Franklinia tree. And it's quite interesting because my father, John, he was friends with a fellow named Benjamin Franklin, and that's how we gave it the name Franklinia. But there's all kinds of genetic studies out today, and all the plants that are being grown in cultivated situations today by science are from the seed sources from that herbarium. So it's quite amazing that their efforts back in the 1700s have enabled this plant to continue on into modern times. Now, this is the one that's on the program. That's my actual sketch. It's in the lily family. And this is one of these plants that I encountered in areas that had fire run through it. And back in those days, the fires were started mostly by natural lightning cycles. And the fire would burn until it ran into a fire break or a fire stop like a stream or a wetlands or a lake or even the ocean. The landscape would just keep burning, and they respond quite well to wildfire situations. But you see, this was a black and white sketch. I have some root ball diagrams there down near the bottom. And then when I got back to the herbarium, I colorized it as close as I could to the actual color of the petals there. You see it somewhere between violet and blue. I think maybe later on in our presentation, you'll actually see some great photos of what this flower looks like. Has anybody seen Bartram Symposium out in the woods? Not many, not many. And then those of you that live around here in Palatka, you may have seen a very famous mural. I believe it's up here on 3rd Street and St. John's Avenue, where there's a lot of flowers of the area. Look what we have here. And what's amazing about this flower, they're really hard to see bloom because they only bloom one day. So they're really hard to find, they're really hard to see, and you'll learn later on in our presentation that the blooming season is actually a little bit longer than what was originally thought. So there is a bigger window if there's fire involved with the habitat where they live, where you might have an opportunity to see them. And I understand in this area of the East Florida Territory, there may be several areas where you can still see Bartram Symposium in modern times. This time of year, even perhaps through the summer and possibly into the fall. There'll be more on that later on in the presentation. Now the one on the right here That's a fall blooming Ixia. You notice it's a little different. The petals are sharper. It's a little different. We'll talk about that in more detail as well. A beautiful flower, though, indeed. And what Bartram presentation on the Ixia wouldn't be complete with a little excerpt from Travels, just to give you a little flavor of my writing skills. Every species or variety of the tribe of plants exhibit very eminent beauties, but this with applause claims the preeminence. Its elegant form of growth and brilliant coloring of its flowers strikes on the imagination delight, and one can't look at it but with admiration. So I would advise you, I would recommend you, if you ever have an opportunity to go out on a field trip and catch the Bartram Ixia growing out in the forest, it's a wonderful experience. It really is. The color of this most delightful of flowers is a lively blue, reflecting a slight cast of purple. The delicate texture of these flowers is admirable beyond anything that vegetation presents besides. Now, if any of you have read much of Travels, you know that I wasn't the best with my punctuation. Many of my sentences were run-on sentences and sometimes even a run-on paragraph. So remember, as you're reading, take a breath every now and then, because you might not have a period for a while. But though these flowers are of so short of durance that seeming defect is ample compensated by the most liberal succession, for the next morning the curious botanist is delighted by a seeming return of those fugitives, or he would rather imagine himself beholding a new creation in the midst of thousands. Now, my co-presenter following me has some amazing photographs of the Ixia in thousands. So it'll give you an idea on what they look like in a forest. And I think this is a good time to introduce Adam Arendell with the Florida Native Plant Society Ixia chapter up in Jacksonville. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Billy. So my name is Adam Rindle. I'm a native plant educator, amateur botanist, and graphic designer. And I've been a part of the Ixia chapter as a board of directors since 2017, and I'm also a past president as well. So a lot of what we do at the Ixia chapter, we do a lot of outreach and educational programs, and we do that by speaking publicly to people. We also take the public out to preserves and conservation areas on our field trips. So we get to show people these wonderful Bartram's Ixias. And we get to show them just how wonderful these habitats are and how biodiverse they are. We also do educational programs for public schools as well, where we get to help students build butterfly gardens. And we also get to show them how to ID common plants and trees as well. And so how it all started with me is that I was lucky enough to go to a high school that really pushed the interests of the students. And so they did that by dividing the high school up in what they called academies. And so I joined the Environmental Science Academy, and because I was really fascinated with that. And so the main aspects of the Environmental Science Academy were horticulture and agricultural programs and classes, but there's also an environmental science component to that. So we ended up doing some projects with maintaining and managing preserves in our county. And so what we did was clean up these areas of invasive plant species and garbage. We also blazed the trails, and we also educated the public of these preserves. Got to do these plant surveys for seagrass beds in the Indian River Lagoon. And so what we would do, we would put on mask and snorkel, and we would jump into the lagoon with these 5x5 squares and put them on the bottom, and we would count every single leaf of seagrass. And that's just to see how the populations were doing. And so that really opened my eyes to a lot of botany and Florida ecosystems and ecology. So it's really important that we teach our kids just how wonderful and fragile these ecosystems are. So for y'all that aren't familiar with the Florida Native Plant Society, the main mission is to promote the preservation, conservation, and restoration of native plants and the native plant communities that they're found in. And the society was first founded in 1980 and received an independent status as a scientific non-for-profit research not-for-profit in 1986. Over the years, the society has grown tremendously. So we have over 5,800 members to this day, and over 33 chapters throughout Florida that represent different regions of Florida. And so each chapter takes on some type of special flower or flora that's either endangered or endemic to its region. So the Ixia chapter took on Bartram's Ixia as our namesake. So scientifically, the Bartram's Ixia is known as Colodoria colestenia, and it's in the iris family. And it's endemic to Northeast Florida, which means it's not found anywhere else in the world. It's a state-listed endangered plant species and has these 6 large blue-violet petals and these 3 yellow, bright yellow stamen and this large trumpet-like style, as you can see on the photo on the left here. It's a really characteristic flower. It's hard to miss when it's in flower. Other names for the Bartram's Ixia is the violet lily, and it blooms in the springtime following a fire and in the morning. And then it has, as William Bartram was talking about earlier, it has a look-alike called the Nemostylus floridana. And its names are the celestial lily, the fall flowering Ixia, or the happy hour flower, because it has the opposite blooming season and period as the Bartram's Ixia. So it blooms in the fall and in the afternoon. And so famous Florida photographer and botanist Roger Hammer coined the name happy hour flower because it tends to bloom right at 4 p.m. So the conservation status of the Bartram's Ixia is considered a G2 imperiled species, which means that's imperiled globally. And so out of the 60 or more populations that have been reported since the early 1900s, most have not been seen recently. Only a few of these populations are known on conservation areas, and so this makes it very vulnerable to extinction throughout its range. Its current distribution, most of the recent sightings are all found in South Duval County and Clay County, and all of these sightings are from well-managed and protected areas. In St. Johns County, in 2013, there were some sightings off the Nocatee Parkway, but all of these roads have been widened recently. And according to the latest 2010 to 2020 census data, St. Johns County has grown over 43%. So that's tremendous growth. So it's not looking very good for the Bartram's Ixia in St. Johns County, but we still need to look and still need to survey a lot of these old vouchers where they used to be found. And then in the more rural counties like Putnam, Bradford, Baker, and Union, all of these have historical vouchers from the 1930s and 1950s. No recent sightings, but we need to do new roadside surveys and check on these old survey markers. But I definitely feel like the Bartram's Ixia is still in these counties. Not much development has happened, so I'm pretty positive we'll still find it in these counties. The Ixia is very challenging to find. So if it's not in flower, it's in this grass leaf stage and it's with other grasses. So it's almost impossible to find if it's not in flower. It dies back every year in a storage bulblet, and it's essentially just waiting for fire to come through and clear out the understory. So these whole ecosystems and these plants that are found, they've evolved with fire. So without frequent fire, these faster growing plant species like shrubs and trees and oaks, they really quickly take over and they shade out everything, and it lowers the biodiversity. And so after this dormant period, in the late winter, the Ixia starts to have one little leaf emerge out of the bulb. And then by April, a single flower stalk will start to emerge. And the best time to see that, that's mid-April, that's about right now actually, to late June. But we've also seen it in late October, which is a record for us, and it's pretty amazing to see that. We were out at a field trip, and one of our attendees ended up finding a Bartram's Ixia. So that was really exciting for us. after a prescribed burn or seasonal fire, the ixias are going to bloom after 34 days. That's a record from us, to 60 days. So that's about a month to 2 month waiting period for the ixias to wake up. And the photo on the right here, you can see, if you look closely, there's little ixias, little purple dots where the ixias are popping through the new plant growth. And you got to go early. The Bartram's ixia starts to bloom right when the sun comes up. And it's a very ephemeral species, so it will start to wither away when the sun comes up. And by personal experience, I've noticed it's different when the weather is either chilly or overcast. The blooms take a lot longer to open. So on a cool morning like the photo here in April, it just took its time to open up. And I just sat there and watched it. And it's quite a sight to see as it slowly awakens and the blooms all open at once. Very spectacular thing to witness. And so the main habitats that the Bartram's ixia really likes are these mesic or wet pine flatwoods, or these savanna habitats. The photo on the right here is the perfect example, in my opinion, of a well-maintained pine flatwoods. And so I have to give a shout out to the St. John's Water Management District. They do prescribed burns in all of these habitats or these preserves that they manage. And they do an excellent job of keeping these habitats burned frequently, every 1 to 3 years. And so without their hard work, we wouldn't get as many Bartram's ixias blooming every year, and we wouldn't see some of these super blooms that we see sometimes. So these open, sandy areas under longleaf pines are perfect places to see. And this photo is at Julington-Durbin Creek Preserve, and that's in South Duval County. Another great example, this is Bayard Conservation Area in Clay County. And what I found too in Clay County, the flowers are more purple. They're a darker color, which is really fascinating to me. I don't know really what that means, but I've always noticed that. And so the photo on the right is some of the pine savannas that is out in Bayard. So another great example of a really maintained pine flatwoods and savanna. So like I was saying before, these ecosystems and plants have evolved with fire. So without the fire, a lot of these plants just go dormant, or they eventually die out because they're shaded by these faster competing, these shrubs and trees that just grow much faster. So the most common species that you're going to find, which is a lot because these habitats are so biodiverse because of these fires, you're going to end up finding a lot of pines, a lot of the longleafs, a lot of seasonal wildflowers like blackroot, meadow beauties. You're going to see aristida, or the wiregrass, and then gallberry. Gallberry is one of these shrubs that I've mentioned that grows really fast and competes just too much with these fragile plants. So if fire hasn't gone into these ecosystems in over 2 or 3 years, these ilaxes, or their holly species, they can grow over 10 to 12 feet. So they quickly shade things out. Not good for the ixias. So you're also going to find some really amazing like milkweed species. There's Carolina milkweed, Michaud's milkweed, and some wetland species as well. You're going to find bog buttons and then hooded pitcher plants, is the photo here. And so what pollinates the ixia? And so not much is really known actually about the Bartram's ixia as far as what pollinates it and what its role is in the ecology. But from just personal observations, I've seen hoverflies, which is the photo here, the little fly here. Hoverflies are pollinators as well, so they eat pollen. And so they'll go to all these little ixia flowers, they'll eat the pollen, and subsequently go to each flower and transfer pollen onto that, which would pollinate the flower. You'll also see bee flies and bumblebees and sweat bees. And sweat bees are the green metallic bees that you sometimes see in your garden, in a wildflower garden. But they also will pollinate the Bartram's ixia. And so the best protections and best management practices, of course, is don't develop the flatwoods. But you also have to burn the flatwoods. You have to burn them every 1 to 3 years to keep that natural fire cycle going. And you have to burn them in the growing season when all these faster plants are growing. So I always like to include references. If anyone is interested in the references where I got any of this information, I'm happy to email it to you. But if anyone has any questions for myself or William Bartram. Anyone, yeah? In the back? Yes. It depends, like if you're a property owner or if you know of a local preserve. The preserves are usually managed by either the county or a water management district. I know the St. John's Water Management District has a pretty big portfolio of preserves and conservation areas. And if they know there's flatwoods or endangered plant species that require these, they will definitely burn them. It's just a matter of how many people they have on hand. Because burning takes it takes insurance and can be pretty tricky. Sometimes it depends on the weather as well. But as a property owner, I believe there are some burn companies you can contact, and they will help you burn your property. So does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Anyone else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
To put this in your yard, is that possible? I mean, could you have a burn area that you burn if you lived in the country?
Yeah, if you lived in the country, for sure, yes, you could.
Could you go to the woods and dig this up and put it in your yard?
If it's on your property, there's no laws that say you can't do that. But if it's on a conservation preserve, yes, you wouldn't be allowed to just dig it up. But our Ixia chapter, we have an annual plant sale, and sometimes we do have Bartram's Ixias for sale. And ironically, the Bartram's Ixia is actually pretty easy to grow. It's in the iris that has these little seeds. You can put them in a pot, and they will usually burn for you. But a lot of times, they won't subsist in a garden. It's just the soil chemistry, that kind of thing. They're really sensitive to that. So they're really just kind of a, what is it? I'm trying to think of the word. Just, yeah, they're very picky, number one. But they're just like a specialty plant in a way, you know.
Sounds just like Billy Bartram. That's what it is.
Yes, ma'am.
As a resident of St. Johns County,
Mhm.
are there any protections for, I know gopher tortoises, they're supposed to be protected, but with all this new development, is there anything that could,
That's a good question. I know it is an endangered plant, listed endangered plant in Florida, but in my experience, it's mainly animals that people are going to save that get most of the funding. But animals need plants to eat. So in my opinion, it should be the opposite. The plants should be, the ones really saved first. But there should be. But in my experience, property owners are allowed to do pretty much, you're allowed to dig up endangered plant species in your yard. So if you own the property, so.
one other question.
Mhm.
In the absence of fire, how long can these plants be expected to
That's a good
exist?
question. I've read they can be dormant for 10 years. I don't know how accurate that is. It's possible because, and then they're an iris, so they have that storage bulb that I was talking about. And that storage bulb is pretty deep in the ground because it's evolved with fire. So it doesn't want to be at the top layer, it wants to be underneath where fire's not going to affect it at all. So it's very possible in that storage bulb that it could last 10, maybe even 20 years. So yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So you were talking about leading people to see the
Yes.
Do you have any upcoming, like you just doing a tour or
Yeah.
just doing like educational groups
Mhm.
for kids?
All of our events or programs that we do at the ICSI chapter, everything is, you don't have to be a member. We always want people to be a member of the Florida Native Plant Society, but anyone can join our meetings or field trips. We will have a field trip, not sure on the actual date, but it's going to be sometime in May to some conservation areas that have been burned within the last 2 months that we know Bartram's Ixia will be in, and we will definitely start to organize that. So if you're curious, though, we're on social media. We also have a website and an email newsletter. If you want to get on that, I can send you that information. Just, yeah.
So what's the website name?
Let me get my card out. I don't want to. Ixia.fnpschapters.org. And so I will share that with anyone. Yeah, it's also on the screen too. Yes, sir.
Wondering what kind of soil composition do they grow in? Because I live on the border of Clay County and Putnam County and Atlantic State Forest, and they're doing prescribed burns out there
Mm-hmm.
at least once a year in different parts of that area out there, or over into Clay County in the latter because on the county line, they do them there also. So I was wondering what kind of soil, because it's an awful lot of sand.
Yeah, well, it's sandy, but not that sandy. Not like a scrubland sandy, not deep sand, but it's going to be sandy. Typically, I believe there's like a hard pan underneath most of these habitats, and it's much shallower in these wet pinelands and savannas. That's why they're generally wetter. But there's going to be that layer of sand mixed in with ash and other like peat materials, which is just like dead decaying plant matter, and it's going to be a good mix of that, but mainly sand.
I know 2 areas that are like that. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I might go out there and start looking now.
Yeah, now is the great time, especially if you see any prescribed fires or to be honest with you, any kind of disturbance. I mean, that kind of will just trigger them to bloom. So just look for that.
We had one in the last year. As a matter of fact, we had one this year, or the beginning of this year, and we had one in the middle of last year.
Great. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I recently had an unplanned fire on my meadow kind of, and it was about 35 acres. And I don't, I don't know if it was there before. Is it just likely to be anywhere where there's a burn?
No, not really. It's very specific to the pine flatwoods. So if you have,
Growing pine tree.
yes, ma'am, if you have like longleaf pines or if you're growing pines like growing for like paper products, it probably was there at one point. It might not be there anymore just because of the nature of growing silviculture that way. The trees are typically closer together, and too much shade after a while will definitely, they won't be able to sustain much longer. But it's certainly possible after a burn. Definitely keep an eye out. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
My comment is related to the lady from St. Johns County about growth.
Mhm.
As a native Floridian and native Putnam County person, but I have lived in Flagler County and Beach since 14. There is so much growth over there, it's kind of like a little St. Johns County. It is just, they're swallowing it up.
Yes, ma'am.
One chunk at a time. And we have a man, they call him the Gopher Man, and he has a card. He's a former fire chief in Broward County, and he used to ride around, and he was very sensitive to this. And there's so much development. I'm not anti-growth, but it should be managed, and people should respect the native flora and fauna of Florida. And so many of these developers go in and they just bulldoze it. They're supposed to, by law, relocate those gophers, but they don't. So if you see that going on, and you want to be a good citizen, you should help the gopher out.
Yeah, you definitely can report all of that for sure. And I know they're supposed to take it pretty serious. And what I'm aware of, they do in Central Florida. What I've heard just from property owners, there are people that have, you can get a permit to relocate one. There's some training involved.
Expensive for them to relocate because they don't like to do it.
Yeah. So they are supposed to relocate them. But as far as like the protections from plants, like I was saying, it's a cultural thing. People see, the gopher tortoise is it's a keystone species. But, people love the animals more than plants generally, in my experience. Does that answer your question? Or what can we do with all the growth? Or
You can't stop.
yeah, that's another presentation. And yes, ma'am. And yes.
To her comment about relocating gopher tortoises, one of my garden clubs in St. Augustine last year discovered that they had a gopher tortoise hole in the middle of their parking lot, and there was lots of construction going on around Moultrie Road, and they inquired into what would it take to get a gopher tortoise relocated, and it would take $9,000. That was the quote.
Yeah, that shouldn't be right. And if you want to save them, it should be essentially free to a property owner for sure to remove them.
Adam, so thankful
Thank you.
for you and the
Thank you so
Bartram
much
Society.
for having me.
And thanks for the Bartram Society. Adam showed up yesterday morning bright and early. It was still dew on the roses and everything. And I walk up, and as they came into the frolic and were setting up their tent, he walks out of his car, and there is a blooming ixia. The very first one I had ever seen. And it happened here in Putnam County, folks. It really did. It was wonderful. Thank you, Adam, so much. And thank you, Billy Bartram, too. So Catherine Braun is a really special person. She, when we started the Bartram Trail here in Putnam County, we sure didn't know what to do. But we knew that there was a Bartram Trail somewhere because we'd all heard of it. We'd all heard of a Bartram Trail Society and all. And so I do what I typically do. I Googled Bartram Trail, and up comes the Bartram Trail Conference. And I looked to see who's in charge, and it was Catherine Braun. I didn't know that Catherine was a PhD Hollifield historical major and also had already written 3 Bartram books. So I just sent her an email. Hey, what's going on? How do you start a Bartram Trail? That was my thing. Well, Catherine emailed me back. And when I got to the second page of the email, I knew that I had the right person to tell me what to do. And since then, Catherine has become a really, really close friend of mine. And she was the president of the Bartram Trail Conference at that time. And she coerced me into being the president of the Bartram Trail Conference 4 years later. And so she has written 6 editions on Bartram. And she is definitely a Bartram scholar and a quintessential expert on all things Bartram. Her particular expertise is in Bartram and the Southern American Indians. That's her specialty, and those are her books.
Hello and good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me and putting up with this virtual presentation. I wish I could be there in person. I know that everyone at the Frolic must have had a great time, and I hope that next year I can come in person. I was invited to speak because of my latest book, which is an edited collection of essays related to William Bartram. It is entitled The Attention of a Traveler and is adorned with this beautiful drawing of a Franklinia flower done by Bartram. And I really enjoyed working on this book, mainly because it involved so many friends and scholars I'd come to know over the years, but I especially enjoyed it because I was able to become a self-proclaimed expert on alligators. Now, if you know anything about me or my work, you know that I'm a historian, not a biologist. However, I did tackle William Bartram's alligators, and I didn't do it like this. This isn't the sort of research I was involved in. Mine involved reading a lot of work by biologists, literary scholars, historians, and primary sources about the South. And I ran into Big George while I was doing my research, or at least photographs of him. But one thing I want you to keep in mind is the stick that Ross Allen has in his hand as we proceed. In any case, I guess the question is, why would a historian wrestle with alligators? Why not leave that to the botanist, or the biologist rather? And the answer is really simple. If you read William Bartram, you cannot escape alligators. Now, my first book was entitled Deerskins and Duffels. It was a study of the Creek Indian deerskin trade. And during the course of that research, I pored over Bartram's travels for what he could tell me about the trade and the people involved. And he could tell us quite a lot. I found him to be a first-rate historical source. His work supplemented the reports of British administrators and colonists in unique and interesting ways, and Bartram provides details that other sources did not. I also believed him to be a highly perceptive, honest, open-minded observer, and he had a wry and I think very underappreciated sense of humor. And here's an example. This doesn't really relate to alligators until the end, but just bear with me. Early in December 1775, Bartram was in what is now the state of Alabama. He and a Young Creek man were in charge of a load of trade goods that they were transporting from Mobile, and they needed to cross a flood-swollen tributary of the Alabama River. They were going to take the goods into the creek towns. And to get across this creek, they had to build a raft. And Bartram provides incredible details on just how you do such a thing using river cane, grapevines, and trees. And it was a multi-storied structure. So once that was done, Bartram and the young man loaded it with trade goods and then guided the raft across the raging waters. And this is where his humor comes in, because he tells his readers in Travels that on the last load of that raft, with other articles containing my property, with all my clothes, which I stripped off except my breeches, for they contained matters of value and consequence more than the rest of my property put together. Besides, I did not choose to expose myself entirely naked to alligators and serpents in crossing the flood. Huh, alligators. Well, that piqued my interest in alligators, especially when I went anywhere near the Alabama River, and I frequently am near the Alabama River. And I would give research talks on the creek deerskin trade, and I would quote that piece on Bartram, really the piece about how you build a raft, because it is a really great description, and one of the only one on raft building in the 18th century South, at least for my part of the world. And I've spent my career talking to audiences, both academic and public, about Creek Indians and William Bartram. And from the beginning of my research talks, people, if they knew Bartram, would ask, are his alligator stories true? Well, I suppose so, but not knowing anything about alligators except to stick clear of them, I was unable to answer. So I started doing research, and thanks to the excellent work of several biologists, we can assess the quality of Bartram's alligator observations. And as one Bartram scholar has noted, Travels is packed with aggressive alligators. They appear and reappear at an exhausting, almost humorous pace. Bartram is constantly endangered, on constant guard, and constantly in awe. And his stories have received a mixed reaction. To put it plainly, some people think he exaggerated for drama in his writings, and some people just think he made it up. Well, I couldn't believe William Bartram just made things up. But during his time in the South, he claimed to have encountered what he called plenty of prodigious large alligators. At times, his boats floated by them. Sometimes he spied them basking on the shore. And as we previously heard, he even swam with them. More famously, he rode into a battle with them on the west side of the St. Johns River in Florida. As numerous writers have observed, Bartram's alligator stories are the most exciting, most dramatic, and certainly the most controversial part of his famous book. The controversies over his testimony about alligators really were an affront to his honor and started almost immediately after his book was published. Because if people question your observations on alligators, that calls into question the veracity of your other observations. How can we trust Bartram on botany and Indians if the alligator observations are flawed? So I've tried to untangle that problem. So my essay was meant to place Bartram's observations into the context of his time, the late 18th century South, and to summarize the findings of modern biologists regarding the accuracy or lack thereof of his famous alligator observations. Aside from the accuracy of what he said, I had my own question, and it was this. Why would anybody in their right mind row their boat into a lagoon full of incredibly large and menacing alligators? And I assumed that Bartram was sane and of his right mind. So the natural thing to do was to start investigating how people in the 18th century South felt about alligators. After all, they lived with them, and they wrote about them, and they reported them. And this is one of my favorite alligator drawings from the American South. This is by Georgia Salzberger, one of the early settlers in Georgia, this beautiful little alligator that he drew. And what I found from my research, what emerged was a near universal belief among Southerners of the time, and this includes colonists and Native Americans, that alligators were just not that dangerous on land. They really aren't that fast. You can outrun them if pushed. Most people can. And there's also the general idea that they did not attack people in the water. So you could get in the water and swim and bathe fetch water for purposes that really wasn't dangerous. Native Americans had a practice they called going to water. They got in the water daily, and they were observed in alligator-infested waters doing this. And that was a general notion. So Bartram had little reason to fear them because country wisdom said, stay on land or in a boat and you'll be fine. You can even swim or bathe and you'll be okay. Just be careful and don't let your dog or pig near the water. And also, don't try to shoot them because they're incredibly hard to kill just using your rifle. What you can do is just use a pole and poke them, and they'll get out of your way. Remember the Ross Allen stick, right? Still working in the 20th century. And if they do get your livestock, just fight them off with that pole. And this is a wonderful illustration that was on the front of one of Davy Crockett's almanac published in 1838. This was after Crockett's death. But obviously, this is a tall tale from the Mississippi about this alligator getting a cow and Crockett rescuing the cow. So this notion that humans were largely immune to alligator attacks and they could be fended off rather easily. So that answered my question, and I agree, Bartram's sane. But Bartram is historically important for his first-hand accounts of alligator range and behavior. He was also instrumental in a roundabout way in the attempt, which was very prolonged, to classify the American alligator. And I'll say this, and I discussed this more in my essay, had he simply supplied a more complete anatomical description of the American alligator and given it a proper Linnaean binomial, he doesn't. He would have been credited with the scientific classification of the reptile. But he was still instrumental in that because others followed his tracks and used his work in the effort to classify scientifically where the alligator fit in all the other crocodilian species across the world. He's also important for ethnohistorians because he provided in his book the only description of the mythical creature we knew as the horned crocodile his description of this creature, which was painted on the townhouses in 18th century Creek towns. No one else describes the art that was on those walls like Bartram, and that included the horned crocodile. And by the way, his descriptions of that were known to Frank Cushing, who, when he was doing the excavations at Key Marco, immediately realized what he had found when he opened the little jewel box, as he called it, and found a horned crocodile drawing on the inside and the effigy head of the alligator. So in today's lingo, Bartram was into alligators in a big way, and in a way I think that botanists, literary scholars, and especially historians have failed to fully appreciate. So we do owe Bartram a big debt for his observations, however limited they are in some cases, and yes, he made some mistakes. But for the rest of my time, I just want to look at it in a nutshell. What are the big things that people always questioned about alligators? Well, the first is size. And this is one of my favorite places in Alabama. It's a place called Alligator Alley. It's a refuge for wayward gators, and that Wes Moore is shown there with one of his gators. And Mr. Moore just herds the alligators around with a hat when he gives shows talking about alligators and so forth. And, he's not really afraid they're going to attack them. He can fend them off with his hat. So again, Bartram's not a nut for going around all these gators. But Bartram's assessment of alligator size has been the target of frequent skepticism. Throughout his writings, he mentions alligators and noted they were of vast size, of monstrous size, and as I've said, prodigious large size. He wrote in Travels, I have seen them 20 feet in length, and some are supposed to be 22 or 23. All right, so he's testifying to 20 feet, and others have told him they get even bigger than that. Bartram's encounters with alligators, let's just say this right now, they were hasty by-eye estimates. In other words, he does not indicate if or how he actually measured a specimen. And it's been only in recent years that modern scientists have developed standards for measuring alligator length. Prior to the late 20th century, methodology varied widely, and it is unrealistic to suppose that Bartram and the other early naturalists who also provided these kind of sizes for alligators carried steel measures to accurately assess a tip of snout to tip of tail length, which is the current standard. Now, ironically, the largest American alligator documented in modern times to date, as far as I know, it was a few years ago in any case, was killed in 2014 in the Alabama River. So Bartram was probably right to keep his pants on. He was swimming the creek there. This poor fellow, known as a Stokes alligator, measured almost 14, the total length measurement was 14 feet, 9.25 inches. The ventral length over the top of the whole gator was 15.5 feet. Now, that's not 20 feet. But again, if you're using your rifle barrel and you know your rifle barrel is, X inches long, and this is how they did it. You just put your barrel and you turn it over and over and over, and then you multiply by how many times you flip your barrel to get the length of the alligator. In rough field conditions, you might not come up with something as accurate as modern people are able to do if you lay them out on a piece of concrete. But the other issue in this size problem is that scientists have yet to fully account for how overhunting in the 19th century, environmental degradation, familiarity with humans, and modern hunting practices, which are geared toward the harvest of large specimens, might skew the maximum size alligators reach in our own time. Thus, while Bartram's ocular estimate might be on the high side, the methods of assessing length, as well as the existence of larger individuals prior to the near extinction of the species in earlier centuries, means Bartram's estimates were likely not outrageous as they might appear when people say, oh, alligators don't get over 12 feet. So take that. Let's give Bartram that one. He wasn't, probably far off. Now, transport yourself with travels. And let's pretend it's late May, 1774, where William Bartram found himself on what he termed a beauteous isle, preparing for a restful evening after an eventful day in which he had spotted wild lime and lantana while botanizing. As he reclined under a live oak tree, the balmy, gentle winds carried the animated breath of fragrant groves, while surf lapped against the shore and the rustles of birds taking roost for the night. I apologize. I let people into the room. Stop the video. Don't start again. Noise, like that which is made by forcing a heavy plank with violence upon the ground, and this dangerously agitated. And as Bartram reported, bellowing occurs in spring, primarily during mating season. And let's just call it bellowing because that's what modern scientists call it. Bartram also reported that when alligators clap their jaws together, it causes a surprising noise, like that which is made by forcing a heavy plank with violence upon the ground, and this may be heard at a distance. Now, as one modern biologist has observed about the head clap, the hollow muffled sound of a huge crocodilian smashing its jaws closed is singular in the natural world. So we have roaring, we have clapping jaws together, we have slapping their heads on the ground. And scientists note that these vocalizations are part of social displays, and that includes the bellowing, the jaw clap, the head slapping. The bellowing serves very important social functions, providing not only auditory but visual clues to sex, size, location, and possibly even social position of the performer. There's also evidence that the activity helps establish territory. Now, Bartram's account on this is all essentially correct, given the state of scientific observation in the 18th century, though of course it's certainly less detailed than the extended studies of modern biologists who have recording devices and who could study this in a prolonged way. But modern biologists do note that these very sophisticated demonstrations include at least 8 different components, and there are audible as well as subaudible sounds, and obviously Bartram didn't hear those. Now, during the mating season, which Bartram witnessed, alligators bellow in unison, while the resulting chorus as loud as the engine of a small airplane. That's been documented in modern times. And you think about an 18th century person in a world in which loud noises were virtually unknown, you can understand why this would impress an 18th century ear more than a modern ear, which is jaded by jet noises and loud traffic noises all the time. So while Bartram's emotional description of the range and power of bellowing might be somewhat overstated, others have noted the intensity and range of alligator bellowing, as well as vibrations near the source of the commotion. One person who studied alligator embryology at the end of the 19th century reported that he had heard alligators bellowing in Florida waters fully a mile distant. So the sound does carry, and it is impressive. Now, no part of Bartram's alligator account has caused as much derision as his account of the vapor or smoke produced by alligators. He's been derided as describing fire-breathing dragons, right? Now, during a period of frenzied feeding, Bartram claimed that he spotted clouds of vapor issuing from their wide nostrils. He more fully described this emanation in his iconic account of bellowing published in Travels. And here I have it for you. Behold him rushing forth from the flags and reeds. His enormous body swells. His plaited tail brandish high floats upon the lake. The waters like a cataract descend from his opening jaws. Clouds of smoke issue from his dilated nostrils. The earth trembles with his thunder. And he repeated this description, relaying the antics of an alligator he called the Old Champion. Listen to this. The Old Champion now swells himself by drawing in wind and water through his mouth, which causes a loud, sonorous rattling in the throat for near a minute. But it is immediately forced out again through his mouth and nostrils with a loud noise. Brandishing his tail in the air, the vapor ascending from his nostrils like smoke. Now back to the full drawing. Now, this has been described by one art historian as, without doubt, the most famous and most important drawing executed by Bartram. And you can see the alligator puffing smoke. I think others might disagree and think the Franklinia illustration is his most famous. It's certainly the prettiest, but the alligator drawing is a wonderful piece of art, no doubt about it. It was apparently sketched in 1774 and sent on to his patron, Dr. Fothergill, who was helping fund his tour. And in his report to Fothergill, Bartram repeated his observation, noting that this illustration represents the action of this terrible monster when they bellow in the spring season. They force the water out of their throat, which falls from their mouth like a cataract or a waterfall, and a steam or vapor from their nostrils rises like smoke. Okay, so while not dismissing Bartram's testimony outright, later-day experts attempted to explain the vapor as condensation. And it's been left to Kent Fleet, who is a University of Florida herpetologist, whose career has been devoted to the study of alligator biology, who was actually the first to photograph the smoke, as we call it, which he figured out is actually water vapor produced from the lungs of the alligator that streams from the mouth during bellowing. And so there is no doubt that, as he said, Bartram's much maligned account of smoke-breathing American alligators is largely accurate. So score another for Bartram. And I must say, if you want a really good book on alligators, then Kent's book is the way to go. He didn't get everything right. He got the placement of the teeth and the way the jaw articulates wrong, but my time grows short. And if I had more time, I would discuss those. You can read about them in the essay. And I'd also talk about Bartram's famous battles with numerous alligators in a Florida lagoon on a trout fishing trip, which is really one of the great American literary stories and says a lot about our view of alligators, even in modern times. I'd also recount his observation on group feeding, which is largely true, which also helped inspire a scene in a James Bond movie. You see, Bartram has tracks. Also, his observations on the tender care of mother alligators and the care that they provide their young, and that is true. I might well recount the various interpretations literary scholars have provided. Some I think are outrageous, some are quite perceptive. But overall, back to the biology, modern herpetologists agree that on the whole, he got more right than wrong, as did those who knew Bartram and alligators. I'll leave it to you to fully read the essay, as well as Travels, to appreciate all of Bartram's alligator stories. But I will conclude with a touching assessment of his observations by a woman who knew him. In 1817, Dr. William Baldwin made a botanical tour of Florida in search of some of Bartram's earlier plant discoveries. And along the way, he encountered one of Bartram's acquaintances as well, Marguerite McIntosh Spalding. She was the widow of James Spalding, the owner of the Indian trading stores on the St. Johns River where Bartram had stayed during his journey. Mrs. Spalding told Baldwin that she remembered Bartram very well, and she told Baldwin his accounts of the alligators is not exaggerated. She believed him, so do I. And I'll conclude by saying that Bartram's various accounts of his interactions with and observations of alligators and their behavior form an essential part of what has rightly been described as America's first literary classic. His work occupies a seminal place in American scientific writing as well. Literary scholars and their musings have added greatly to our appreciation of Bartram's work as literature. And scientists have confirmed many of his observations on alligator behavior. Thus, Bartram occupies a rarefied space as both a romantic and a scientist, as a human who stood in awe and occasional terror of his surroundings, while still being able to capture and preserve for posterity what he saw in both prose and picture. In his book, The Social History of the American Alligator, the author Vance Glasgow declared, Bartram's version of alligator stories certainly wins, hands down, any contest for colorful alligator writing. And I don't know a soul who has read Bartram who would not agree with Mr. Glasgow. Thank you so much. I wish I could have been there, but perhaps we'll see you, if not around an alligator hole, at the next Bartram Trail Conference, which will be in Athens, Georgia, this coming October.
Catherine is, again, a very special friend of the Bartram Trail Society in Florida. She raised us. And her observations and her books are all like that. She goes out and finds the experts, brings the information back, and relates it to Bartram. And that's exactly what our next speaker is going to be all about. I met Mark Emery in Tallahassee, Florida. Let's see, how do I say this delicately? He and I spent the night together in the governor's house in Tallahassee, Florida. And we were up for a semi-conference type thing. And I had not known Mark before that. But after talking to him and looking at his videos and his photographs, I really became to admire him. And so I sent him our copy, and there's our copy of the drawing that Catherine was talking about. So you can see a whole lot of detail when you get up close to our drawings there. And so Mark, I called him up when I figured out, okay, we got to do the symposium, and I knew what I wanted Catherine to talk about, and it only made sense to call Mark and say, I need to see this on film. And he said, okay, but have a good sound system because the roaring is just like Bartram said, it'll shake the walls. So looking forward to that. Mark Emery is an award-winning filmmaker, musician, and photographer. Emery has worked for the BBC, National Geographic Society, and the Smithsonian Network. This is what he does, and his wife does, by the way, right, Mary? So we really appreciate, Mark, you joining us. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
I am so proud of you guys for putting together this thing with the Bartram Trails. We wish we had it in Ocala. I guess Bartram didn't make it quite that far. He got to Salt Springs, but not quite to Ocala. But we love what you're doing here, and we think it's really great and important. What we did on this alligator sound business has never been done. And I say that because I've been working on films for Geographic, for BBC, for many other people, including Planet Earths and all those, for 30 plus years. And we, in the last 6 or 7 years, including my good friend Kent Vliet at the University of Florida, whose book, I am not representing Kent, but this is the best book on alligators I've ever read. And it has some great references to Bartram in there as well. But what we were doing was learning a lot about sound with alligators. I had a strange growing up period. My parents were both classical musicians. They went to Princeton and studied at Westminster Choir College, traveled and sang under Leonard Bernstein and New York Symphony Orchestra. They were good classical folks. I'm not that person. I wanted to be outdoors, so I ended up playing jazz and rock and roll, right? So, but at any rate, the long and short of it is I got to work for the Ross Allen Reptile Institute when I was a young man. So everybody came through there at the time. You know, the folks from Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom were there all the time, and lots of other folks that were quite famous at that time, Marlon Perkins and all those guys. And so we got to watch other filmmakers doing what they do. And we also, the people who worked there was like 4 or 5 of us, we would wrestle alligators 5 times a day, milk rattlesnakes, work with pythons, anacondas, lots of other different species. And it was the basis of a pyramid that ended up working at Geographic all over. We have shot in Botswana, the Nile crocodile, Orinoco River croc in Venezuela, Cuban crocodile, the most aggressive crocodile in the world, jumps 6 vertical feet and takes animals out of trees. So nobody has a vocalization like these guys. I was on the river the last couple of days, and I was also down in the Everglades last week filming for National Geographic, and we're working on getting some really different things. One is this jaw clap or head clap, and we got 3 of them down there. I can't show you those yet because they own them, but they'll be on soon. There's also a great show on called America the Beautiful, and it is beautiful. It took 3 years, and the people who did Planet Earth did the music and the editing. They are among the best editors in the world, and we shot it. Luckily for us, they hired Americans to shoot America the Beautiful, and they gave us more days than they should have. I usually had to barter with Geographic to record bellowing, right? Because I can often get it in 3 or 4 days if I've got good weather and I've got to do things, but you don't get everything. You just get the basics. So Disney bought National Geographic. So Disney asked me, how many days do you need to do alligators bellowing? I go, oh, 10 days. I figured I'd get 5. I got 10. So it's in that film, America the Beautiful. The first 2 1-hours are on freshwater North America, and you will see bellowing like you've never seen it before. A good friend of mine, Tim Lehman, is one of the best photographers. Well, last year he was voted best photographer in the world, and that doesn't come easy because he went through the BBC and their best photography exhibits. He blew everybody away. So he and I went down in the swamp with him. He'd worked with orangutans, is the only mammal he'd worked with. He'd been mostly working with birds in Borneo. And we got down in the swamp at water level. We're using lenses that Geographic owns that are $70,000 lenses. They're 1,500 millimeters. I can zoom from 50 to 1,500 millimeters very quickly. The problem with these alligators, the first bellow is the best. So when he bellows, you have to zoom in very. How do you find him? He's with a lens that long. So you go wide, you find him, you push in, and then you start recording. Well, what we did first was decide, let's talk to them first, because I've worked with them a lot, and they come up when Harley could go by a street nearby, and they'll start bellowing. You don't know when it's going to start. You still have 6 seconds. So you may be, fiddling with your tripod, and all of a sudden they start, and you miss that first bellow. So we only got 10 days, right? Probably I should have had 4 or 5. And so what we did was I borrowed a microphone from the man who did Thriller for Michael Jackson. He did Paul McCartney, The list is on Chicago Symphony, many, many people. Barbara Streisand. We took that microphone, we went to the St. Augustine Alligator Farm, and we took this huge stereophonic mic and put it on an alligator named Hunter. And Hunter is the James Earl Jones of all alligators. He has a gorgeous contrabass sound. He's really, really cool. And so you're going to hear some of Hunter. Do me a favor, though, is just shut down for a minute, take a deep breath, blow out, and then just shut your eyes for a few minutes, and we're going to listen to Hunter just with our eyes shut, so you can imagine what William Bartram saw. The only thing you're going to miss is there's a subsonic that we can't give you. But everything else will be right here. And you hear the water splashing back at the distance? That's what you hear when you're out there. And if you listen close, sometimes in the background you hear a higher pitched and shallower sound. That's a female answering back. He hit the microphone. Okay, guys, you got the idea, right? Let's give Hunter an applause. He did a good job. So what I want to do first is just give you a quick look at maybe what our good buddy Billy would have seen when he first got here. I love that you call him Billy. The Billy I know back in Ocala runs around with a piece of AstroTurf glued to the front of his pickup truck. I said, Billy, what are you doing? He's going, oh, my dog likes it up there. I ride him through the woods. When we hit a scent, that dog will come off there and he's got something to purchase on. So that's what I use it for. Well, I saw your brother early. He's got one and it's got like Velcro on it. He said, yeah, his wife doesn't like that, so he takes it off for church on Sunday. So, guys, before we go any farther, I am not a biologist or botanist or a vegetarian. I'm a Presbyterian. I'm not even very good at that, okay? So I skipped church to be here today. So what we want to do today is just take a look at first what we think this must have looked like 1,000 years ago. The guy who's speaking to you is as old school as you get. He was 60 years on the Ocklawaha and the Silver River. He would drive boats every year all the way from the Ocklawaha or the Silver River all the way to Jacksonville, back when motors weren't what they are now. So amazing guy. His name's Leon Cheatham. He was a sheriff on the river for many, many years, and if you did something wrong, he would help you out.
You know, I can only imagine what Florida must have looked like thousands of years ago.
We may want to turn that down just a little. just a little bit on your face. Good. Sorry. So you get the idea of what we still have. That was all shot in the last 4 or 5 years. So we've still got a lot of good critters around. Thank you. Talking about Ross Allen and those guys, they were the next layer after the Bartram bunch. They went all over the United States, but they also went all over the world. Ross brought back every species of crocodile to the university through different friends in the University of Florida and different people who knew where to go and what to do, brought them back to Ocala. And Ross Allen's Reptile Institute, when we worked there, had every species at one time, and they had many other species. He was in the old Johnny Weissmuller movies. He was the double for Tarzan underwater with the alligators or the crocodiles. And so all of us learned from those guys growing up. Had the end of this finger taken off and put back on, had many puncture wounds, and so the learning curve is relatively steep. Rattlesnake bites, we all got those as a part of your handicap. But at any rate, what you ended up learning is that almost all these animals have a lot of limits, just like we do, and so we don't need to be afraid of them. I'm going to show you some of the other behavior of these animals that might kind of go along with what our friend Bartram saw. But as far as alligators go, one of the things we did was my wife and I crawled in an alligator den in Georgia. And there was 6 alligators in there. And we went with a scientist, and he went in first. I made sure. And he was skinny enough that got to the end, and it was a turnaround and come back out. Now, I couldn't do that. The one I picked had 6 live alligators in there, and they were all adults. Now, they weren't monsters, but they were 7 to 9 feet, and they were healthy. And got in there and didn't know exactly what was going to happen, so I had a little cypress stick about that big. They can't open their mouth any wider than the hole, and the hole's only about that wide, so I figured we had a good shot there. So I just scrunched in there and got in there, and make sure your hands are in front of you. Don't ever do this, by the way, like I have to tell you. So got in there, and they all start hissing. There's an epiglottal flap at the back of the throat. A bull snake has it too. If you're out in the woods and you see those little sand mounds out there, there's a snake that actually goes down in those mounds and takes a pocket gopher out for dinner. And he's not inviting it to dinner. That is dinner. But he has an epiglottal flap too. So if you have a snake that hisses at you, it's not a rattlesnake. It's a snake that you want around to take care of those pocket gophers for you, to tear up your fields. Anyway, so back to these guys and what all was going on back then. We just had a great time in those dens looking around how complicated they were. They bit dirt, pulled it out, dropped it, that kind of arrangement. And so for people who they get here from other parts of the country, they have no idea why alligators are valuable. That's a big part of it right there. If you have a drought and everything dries up, a lot of us as local Floridians know, they're going to dig out caves. They're going to dig out the bottom so they still have more room to stay. If they're not near another water supply, if there is, they'll just walk to another place and jump in. You know, if they're near Lake George and something small lake starts drying up in season, they'll just leave and go over there. The other thing is they'll run out of food. I don't think most people know about 65% of their diet, particularly growing up, is usually crayfish. They're not eating people. They're not eating Toyotas or, small. At any rate, so the upshot of that is that you want to make sure that if you see alligators on land, you give them plenty of room, but all he's doing is trying to get from one place to another. And Bartram and those guys are right. They're not racehorses. You can see he's not built like a thoroughbred. The hind legs don't sit up high, and they can't run like a deer. I have been on land with them a good bit, filming them, and they can cut and move a lot better than they can in the water in some ways because there's no resistance from the water. So they can spin around. Don't get too close to them, and don't try to get a selfie. You'll be all right. So as far as these guys go, you'll see more and more water stuff and underwater stuff. What we've done for a long, long time is work with one of the real greats of all times. He lived across the lake from me on Little Lake Weir. This man invented underwater cinematography. He did Flipper, Jaws, Splash, Cocoon, The Abyss, 2 or 3 James Bond movies. He did all the underwater stuff for Thunderball, built the sleds for underwater and all that stuff. And he lived across the lake. So when I first met his son, who was then in his 30s or 40s, and his dad was about 6 years out of retirement, said, what do you know how to do, Mark? I said, well, I can write music and I can wrestle alligators. He said, come on by the house. So I couldn't work for IBM or 3M, so I got a job with him. And what we did was the first 2 shark shows for the United States. The sharks in the early season were all, for these TV shows, were all made in Australia. So the first ones that were actually made in the United States were, as far as I know, by Jordan Klein. And Jordan have ended up winning the Academy Award for inventing underwater cinematography. So there's going to be underwater alligator stuff here. I can attest to much of what they were saying about Bartram. I've swam with them every year for many, many days. Sometimes we shot IMAX with them. The camera's 290 pounds. You can't move quickly with a 290-pound housing. It doesn't weigh 290 underwater. It's neutrally buoyant, but it's still hard to steer. It's not really hydrodynamic. So in most cases, they're looking at you, trying to figure out what you are. When they're underwater, they have a nictitating membrane over their eye, right? And so those of you who have seen them up close, now there'll be some shots in here, you can see them going underwater and popping up, and that little membrane will move. If you take your mask and blow on it and then put it on, that's what he can see. He's seeing a foggy view of everything else. If you're swimming along on a lake and you see a gator coming to you and he's going to check you out, you think, get a good breath, blow out, suck in a good one, and drop down on the bottom. He'll go right over top of you, 99% of the time. The other 1% I don't know anything about. Oh, you are listening. You guys are great. Oh, geez. All right. So one of the things they keep talking about is bellowing. So when Sam talked to me first about bellowing, I literally went out and started filming bellowing. And I had been filming for National Geographic in the Everglades a couple of weeks ago. And what we were getting were jaw claps, where they raise their head up and slam them shut. So I've got a little bit of that scattered in some of these little clips. But what I wanted to show you first was some of the other things that may have been a problem for, where did I put that one shot? He was talking about what that fog or steam looks like coming out of their mouth. This is a clip from a movie film, so the movie cameras have a 60th of a second frame, so it's slightly out of focus. It looks like that's just movement in the camera, but that's steam coming out of his mouth. And it's not really steam even, because on hot, sunny days, they can still do it. How can they do that? So part of it, you need to get this book. There's a lot of crazy stuff in there. One of the things in there about alligators is they also can't catch viruses, and they're studying that quickly now, much more so than they have in the past. So let's take a look at this is largely filmed on the Silver River in Ocala. There are glass bottom boat drivers who've been there 50 or 60 years. Nobody interviewed them. I worked for them, and I said, well, let me just go ahead and have them be the experts and tell us what they think about alligators. And this is just a very little bit of them talking about what they saw over 50 or 60 years. And none of them are botanists or herpetologists or anything else, but they are naturalists. They're on the water every day.
Gator's an amazing thing to watch. Over the years, working with different film crews and then working with the Ross Island Reptile Institute, by Ross itself when he owned it, we did a lot of underwater stuff on filming alligators, because Ross is well known for that, of course. But that membrane that they have over their eyes, that they can roll it down when they're underwater, when they don't get water in their eyes. And they can't see real good, of course. They'll be swimming along, they'll swim into a log, or they'll swim right into the camera lens a lot of times. And you get to somebody that's never work with alligators, and that gator come up and bumps that camera lens, he thinks he's in serious trouble. He don't know that alligator can't see it. He's gonna go around him or back off or whatever.
You know, really and truly, I read, you know, where alligators only stay under the water approximately about an hour, but that's not true. Here at Silver Springs, I've seen them here half a day.
I have seen them about an hour. I've been a couple of trips and come back and the alligators still on the bottom. Especially during the winter time, because the water's more warm on the outside.
Sometimes they're just there. And sometimes you'll see them every now and then, they'll try and get a fish.
I see alligators sometimes, they'll feed on those birds, and once in a while they'll feed on a turtle. They'll be real hungry before they eat a turtle.
And the gator's not gonna just run up there and grab you to start with if you don't bother him. Now, if you get in his territory, especially a female, when she's nesting, you better be able to run, or she ain't gonna give you a run for your money.
She's not gonna let anybody, even dad, near her babies. I was trying to point out, I was driving Fort King, and I was just backed out from the dock going around Spider Monkey Island. And over on the right there, a shoreline, there was a mama with a baby. You know, usually the baby's on the back. And I tried to get close enough so everybody could see, which was a mistake. Because when I got a little too close, mama forgot about babies on the back and all that. She didn't jump on the boat, but she jumped behind the boat. And everybody back there near me was just as muddy as they could be. Scared me to death. Never try that again, okay? Don't ever try it.
Like that's going to be the first thing you try, right? She's a sweetheart. That's Virginia, and they've all these folks have now retired. So I was so glad I did a film on them, and we went to 7 movie theaters and played it, and just loaded the house and brought them with us to answer questions, and we just had a blast with them. So the whole film is available too as a DVD now, and we'll probably stream it here pretty soon. COVID just slowed us down, or we'd have just gone all over the state. Anyway, so some of the things, just to recap some of what they're talking about. One is how all these animals do underwater. They're stunning. Their real expertise is underwater, not on top. You know, when they get up on land, they're insecure. They're walking across open country, and they can only go so fast. They are vulnerable in a lot of different places that we wouldn't think about. In the water, we'll get ready to see some more of that bellowing. When they raise their jaw up like that, another alligator can bite them in the throat. And I've actually got still pictures of the whole flap hanging down, and that alligator ate somehow, healed back up 2 years later, and it was already back to where he could operate. So their system is something we need to study a whole bunch more about, how to recover from serious injury, and also how they operate in general. A sign from us as to what we think an alligator is doing is no big deal. We watch them. Almost everyone in here probably has an alligator story. But if you really watch them with a biologist or a scientist, Kent Vliet at the University of Florida, who did the book, we're at eye level with them. I was with him the second time he did, I don't know if you saw those shows years and years back, but he was at water level with a still camera taking pictures of their behavior for National Geographic. And I got to get on with this guy. So the next time he did it, I was in the water behind him, pushing him off 10 and 12-foot alligators with a cypress pole. And what you found out was that all the symbols, all the signs of information going back and forth between these alligators is at water level. If he inflates this much, that's a big deal. If he does it that much, he's fixing to go. And so back then, we were using movie cameras. It's $400 every 11 minutes. So you have a very set budget when you're making a film for Geographic. How do I know when an alligator is going to charge? I would watch back here. His body would show a little bit of fast breathing, a little bit, right behind his front leg sometimes. Also, inflating his body, buckling up, just like a shark will do underwater. They'll get real bowed up, and then something's going to happen. But even then, sometimes they would lock for 15 and 20 minutes looking at each other, getting ready to go. And so a lot of it is bluff. We work a lot. We live half the year here and half the year in Alaska. And so we work a lot with grizzly bears and brown bears. You would think an animal that elevated intellectually would be superior. They do the same kind of crazy stuff that these guys do. A lot of the same kind of behaviors. It is Bartram days up there still. Some of the pastures I go to will have 50 grizzly bears in one pasture. There are no trees. We go out there and sit down with them and film them. And so you have to learn that behavior. And the same thing with these alligators. We were in the Everglades last week, and one was coming up to me about, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, ma'am. What's your name?
Michelle?
Michelle, that far away, and did a jaw clap right to me. What was he saying? I know exactly what he was saying. Give me a little more room. I want to come up this canal. Okay, all right, I'll pull back. Let him on go by. And I got great close-ups of him coming back out. He was fine with me once he just made his point known. The other thing they'll do is dominate another alligator by coming up and inflating and getting right on him really, really close, and that other animal will sink down. We all remember high school. There was always a guy that had a 21-year-old body and you were 16. It was just ugly. So we're going to take a look at now how those attacks and all those things kind of occur. And see if this will open up. First, I got one more thing I wanted to show you. Let's see if I can get it in a bigger frame here. It'll take just a second. I did include some stuff that's right out of camera so you can see how we shoot and what we're doing. We're using a crazy camera that was invented by a guy in California that was making sunglass commercials. An American idea was this: what if we just took and realized that every single frame that we take in a camera, in a digital camera, is the same as it could be in a movie camera? What if we did 24 frames in 1 second? What would happen? You'd have a digital movie, right? Well, he was the first one to make it cinematic. So we took these cameras and put them on all different kinds of things. I took the first one that we used at Geographic. James Cameron got 50 for Avatar. We got 1. And I took it out, and the whole unit cost $80,000. And I'm nervous, right? And then this lens was $80,000. So it was, I'm walking around with a mobile home, and a new one, double wide. So at that time. And so we were able to film some of these creatures. But I wanted to show you, if Bartram, in fact, did come across thousands of alligators, what would that look like? Well, I'm not going to get in a small boat and look at that. One of my friends did, and accidentally had one come in the boat and take his arm, pull him under, and he was able to get away. He's at the alligator farm in St. Augustine, and his name is Jim, and you can ask him about it. Somebody dropped their tripod in, got too close, and he went to get it with a small boat. And so they will occasionally do crazy things. But this is what it looks like. No sound, no nothing. This is just what that many alligators in one place look like. And you see they're all relating to each other. They're right on top of each other, but they're testing each other with their mouths. Why in the world would they test you with their mouths? They got just big teeth. They can't feel anything. Buzzer sounds. They have ISOs. We're going to get tested on this at the end. Integumentary sensory organs. They're little dots all over their face. A shark has ampullae of Lorenzini. He's got ISOs. And ISOs are nerve endings. If you touch that nerve ending, he'll go, oh, it feels good. You touch the wrong one, he'll bite you. So these guys are testing each other out, all while being crowded together. But as soon as food drops, there is no Judeo-Christian ethic. We're done. Everybody's going for that. You can lose a foot, a tail, anything like that. So many of the reptile foot places around Florida have a stumpy, or they'll have an animal that has, it's only 3 legs or something like that. And that's what's happened. They get in a big crowd like this. I'm sorry? No, this was actually at St. Augustine Alligator Farm. And the ones in the Everglades right now are not that thick. They have a drought, and when we were down there, they were hiding all back in the sawgrass because there was no deep pools to hide in. And so we went out, where the Miccosukees have 60,000 contiguous acres there. I don't know if you've been with Tiger Tail Adventures ever, but those guys, their families own all that. If you go to the tribe and ask them to go to special places, they'll take you to special places, and there'll be 100 alligators right there. And so we took an IMAX camera a couple years ago and went with them, and have friends in the Navy SEALs, and they went with them last winter and had a great time with them. They took them to some cool places. Anyway, so, but this next one, what we did was we took the sound thing to another level, because we're a little goofy. Oh, that's not the right one. There it is. Got out of order. So imagine if you took that sound we just heard and you ran it through a special machine that did the same subsonics you get when you go to a Jurassic Park or something at Disney World, where it shakes the room. The sound is a real deep, low sound. We took that alligator sound that you listened to, and then we put a machine put together. BBC found a guy that was an MIT graduate that worked for Bose. He's now working for Apple. He created us Waterboy 2. And Waterboy 2 goes underwater, plays subsonics so loud that it's 6 times the sound of what you just heard. And he plays it to alligators. The first time we tried it, I thought it was just going to scare the alligators. So we went to a pond that's part of the Gatorland back lot, and that back lot area has 150 gators that were caught in suburbia that they don't want to shoot in somebody's backyard, so they'll catch them, take them down there, and just drop them off, right? So they're huge, big, nasty, naughty alligators. Because I had a friend of mine, Tim Lehman, with me, we got in at water level and shot them at water level. And I had two guys with 10-foot poles on either side of us that we hired and bought them lunch. To keep the alligators off, because you really do have to concentrate. That thing is so fast. And what happened when we cranked that up? 70 of them came up at one time. Now is not the decision about which one to shoot, is which one's going to go first. You know, everyone was just bellowing at one time. It was mayhem. And I looked out over to him in a couple hours later, and he looked at me and he goes, "Man, I think we got it for the whole show." And I said, "Tim, we've got 9 more days." So we literally shot it from 3-story buildings straight down on top of them. We shot them in the rain. We shot them all different ways. None of it will ever make it to the big, but some chunks of it are now on Instagram, that kind of stuff with Geographic. They've got little clips coming up from time to time, and you'll see a gator just going like this and shaking. Well, we were using some cameras that shot up to 3,000 frames in 1 second. And that's what some of the last shots you just saw were, where you saw extremely slow motion or that steam coming out of his mouth or whatever it is. So we're going to give it a shot here and see if you guys are all still awake. All right, so what's going to happen here is you're going to see regular bellowing behavior, but you're also going to see them get their neck a little too far up next to somebody else, and what happens when it does. I don't know how this one got louder, but it did. If I want to drop it down even more, so I'll get to the back there. It's pretty loud. Thank you. That was better once you got it down there. Thank you, thank you. Didn't know we'd have our own sound engineer. Crazy looking back up close, isn't it? The way it's all articulated like that. Thank you. I have to thank Tracy Collins, too. He also worked on the music with me. We have a recording studio in our house and one over at his house. So if one of us can't think of something, we go to the other one's house. We've written 320 television shows now for Geographic, for lots of other people over the years, Discovery Channel and ESPN and lots of stuff. So typical Southerners, you know, if you have a couple weeks, you go start another career there and keep it busy. And so we did music and wrestling alligators or whatever it took. So what we were talking about earlier on with Billy Bartram was the idea about the bellowing. And I'm going to read a little passage out of here in a second from Kent Vliet so we can understand it a little better. But there really is stuff they don't know about all that yet. I mean, there's things that it could be, but they haven't got it all wired completely. But I want to show you a little bit of this, and while it's running, I'll see if I can find that passage and get you going. Oh, this is the wrong one. This is a really cool animal, though. This is Goliath. This guy lives on Sweetwater in outside of Gainesville on the road there on Williston Road. And this has no music to it. It's just one of my favorite guys, and I finally got him bellowing out in the open where I could see him. And there's no sound, like I said, there's no sound to this, but you'll see the whole thing all the way through. He's starting to get disturbed and starting to get riled up. He's elevating his body. And for a moment there, you think, oh, he's just going to do a jaw slap. He'll bring his head up and slam it down like you saw that other one do in the other section. But then pretty soon what he's doing is he's doing it again. So what right there, he's literally sucking in lots and lots of air. He's gulping air like a diver before they do a free dive, just getting a whole bunch of it going in there. And he's going to, well, you see what he's doing there. That's a subsonic sound coming up, creating all the water dance. And then right here is actually when he bellows. He doesn't bellow when that water's dancing. It's right after that. So as he comes back down, he's going to expel all that air. And then again, he's going to bellow again. So this guy actually bellowed 6 times in a row. He was my hero for the day. I wanted to give him a pack of M&Ms with peanuts, but I didn't do it. I was good. But and that's enough of that. But just to get the idea of what that looks like in the wild, in a place with a really big alligator. That one's over 12 feet, we figure. And I don't say that lightly. We've worked with a lot of alligators, and there's a few around that are 13 plus and whatever, but not many. So pretty rare. And hang on to some questions now, because if you have some later on, if I don't know the answer, I can make it up, okay? I'll be there to help you. Just a couple other things real quick, just some still pictures so you can see how clear the springs were. This was 20 years ago, shot with a Nikonis slide camera, and that's how much they've changed. If you go to Silver Springs now or other places, there's green algae in a lot of places, as you know, and those currents washed a lot of that away in the old days, and they had times when it was really bad there, but what they used to do was they would take a hose, hook it up to a fire spigot, and go down to the water, and pressurized water washed off all the algae. So that's one of the things that's going on. Recruitment is unbelievable. So if you are seeing alligators everywhere and moms with babies, you're going to see this kind of action. The babies will sit on the mama's head. I use long lenses. I worked with mamas with babies a lot, and what would happen is at Silver Springs at Ross Allen's Reptile Institute, they would come in and say, hey, we got, this is Fish and Game now. I would come by and say that we've got one in a rain culvert at Publix. Can you come get him out? Oh, yeah, but we don't have anybody. We don't have a soul. We have 2 guys for an area the size of, Connecticut to run all this. So we've got plenty to run after ourselves. Can you do that? So we'd go down there, and when she had a nest back then, alligators were endangered, right? So what you would do is peel off the top of the nest and take a magic marker and put it on every single egg. Do you reckon Mama liked that? No Mama would like that. So then you put it in a Tupperware thing with little egg holders all the way through with that same thing. If you flipped it upside down and the yolk wasn't developed, it would kill the alligator. At this time, they were literally on the endangered species list. So that time you found out how good your buddy was as a friend, and also with a broom. And so what they would do is that the alligator would be attacking the whole time you're emptying that nest, and he's hitting her with a broom on the schnoz, and it's not hurting her at all, and she'll run back and get mad and come back again. So when you see these little guys, it's cool. Take a picture from a distance. Now with a lot of these cameras, the resolution's so good you can push in on the picture later. You don't have to be super tight on it like that. I'm rooting for you guys. I don't want to see anybody come in here like me with parts of my finger missing. All right, one last thing real quick here. 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that alligators can bellow at night. And so those of you, someone was just mentioning, I didn't get your name, ma'am. What was your name?
Pam.
Pam, still is, isn't it? Yeah, it's not was your name. Yeah. So Pam was telling me she'd just been in the Okefenokee swamp, and this is what they do at night. And this is almost night. It was really, really close. It was super early in the morning, and their steam is coming out. So if you want to see this actually happen, one of the things you can do at this time of year, right now up into mid-May, they'll be doing that at certain places, is if you find areas where they're staging up and there'll be a bunch of them, they'll do one at dawn, and they got banker's hours at 10 o'clock, they're going to do one, and that's it for the day. Now, if a motorcycle comes by or a helicopter comes by, they can bellow any time of the year. It's an answer is all it is. It's not the mating call, or it's not a general information thing for other gators to know where he is. They're just answering that sonic sound, right? My wife knows when we're walking along through the woods and a crow starts crowing out where I'm at, I'll use, right? Use a barred owl. Crows hate barred owls, and boom, the crow shuts up and takes off, and I can go hunting, right? So you can talk to each other out there too. It's all right. They all put up with you. Now, you think, well, what in the world are you shooting all this stuff for? But one of the things that we ended up doing with all this was a certain football team hollered at us about 5 or 6 years ago. And I know some of you are Seminoles. I apologize. My brother and sister both went to FSU. But these games started out with 90,000 people doing this, something Bartram would never have thought of. And at the end of the end zone is a 150-foot screen with what you've been looking at. And I'm going to play you what we did with that piece. Unfortunately for you guys, we got a little carried away, and they wouldn't use the music that we wrote, but I own it, so we could play it for you. And you can suffer through it. My parents liked all kinds of classical music, but they didn't like a guy named Mahler too much. Mahler was a famous German composer. So as an ode to them, I wrote a mixture of redneck and Mahler, and I hope you enjoy it. We'll take questions after this. Yeah, I know. My brother went to FSU and still rooted for the Gators, so we just can't tell what's wrong with us. Guys, got any questions about all this? Who wants to go swimming with me? Yes, ma'am.
That book that you mentioned, could we have the title and the author?
You can. It'll be $3. Yes, ma'am. And unlike myself, he actually mentions my wife in the book as well at the very beginning. He says a thanks to photos. And my wife deserves a lot of putting up with a lot of things, right? She's been in a boat with alligators in the back of our van in the early days, and now on pickup trucks and everything else. And we've had rattlesnakes in our garage. It's wonderful on the books and very helpful in the field. So a perfect wife, right? But that's it's called Alligator, and it is by Kent Bliet, B-L-I-E-T. If you know the Arts and Car Building in the biological lab in Florida, he's oversees that whole lab for that. And he's been there probably 35, 40 years. This book is a 40-year dedication. There's not a page there where I go, how did I not know that? I mean, I've been with him, so many shoots, probably 15 or 20 shoots we've done together. And we're always swapping tales back and forth, but there's stuff on every page. So if you think know alligators really well, don't think you're going to get away with being humble. You're going to be humble with this book. It's not a textbook. It looks like it, but you start reading it, it's like a novel. So it's amazing. And some of the things that he's discounting in there and other things that he's bringing up, the things he's bringing up are that this animal has developed a way of getting rid of viruses and healing itself at a real high level. So we need to know more about that. Yep. Any other questions? Any answers? Thank you so much.
Thank you. You saw it, didn't you? Yeah, it's really, really true. So let me introduce to you our next speaker, and it's going to be my friend Rob Matson. And Rob Matson's a scientist and author. He worked for St. Johns River Water Management for years and years, and he's a local expert when it comes to the St. Johns River. Well, he's just an expert on the St. Johns River. And the first presentation I heard Rob give was on a Paddle, Florida trip, and we were down at in Roadheaver Bowie's Ranch. And I'm sitting there listening to this thing, and there ain't a whole lot of things that he can tell me about the St. John's that I don't know. Well, how bad that, so after the first 5 minutes, he had already gone past me. And also, Rob, we thank you for coming. Rob is also a director of the Bartram Trail Society of Florida. So welcome, Rob.
I recently retired in November from the St. Johns River Water Management District, spent 17 and a half years with them as a senior environmental scientist, and then before that, I was 17 plus years with the Suwannee River Water Management District as a biologist. I'm an aquatic biologist, so I've got about 35 years experience working on just about every river system here in the northern Florida peninsular area. So kind of similar to kind of what a number of these talks have been doing. We're sort of doing then and now, you know, what Bartram saw and what it is now. So the St. Johns River has gone by many names over the centuries. Some of y'all probably know this. The Seminoles called it Hualaca, the River of Lakes. The early Spanish explorers, really after De Leon, called it the River of Currents because the currents in the lower river and offshore, that's kind of how they found the river, is the swirling currents offshore of the St. Johns River mouth in the Atlantic. A small group of French Protestants trying to flee persecution during the Protestant Reformation established a small colony in the Fort Caroline area, and they called it the River of May because that was the month they arrived. And then the later Spanish colonists who came to Florida variously called it either the River of St. John or the River of St. Matthew. The actual name St. John's River was settled when Florida was British territory, and it seems when William came through in the 1770s, he called it the St. John's River. So by then, the name was pretty much set. So just very quickly, we know these guys, so I don't have to go into them. Of course, William accompanied his father John in the mid-1760s to the east coast of Florida, sent by King George III to explore this new territory that Britain had gotten from Spain. And then, of course, William returned about a decade later under the employment of Dr. Fothergill. So when I talk to folks who are not as familiar with Bartram, what I like to say, nowadays, if you're fabulously rich, you buy a professional sports franchise, right? A basketball team or a football team. Back then, when you were fabulously rich, you had a country estate with a big garden, or maybe a greenhouse too, and you hired people like William to go around the world to exotic locales collecting plants for your garden, so that when you held these big parties, you could take your guests through and say, and this tree came from Sri Lanka, or something like that. So that's how you'd impress people. Nowadays, they bring them to their skybox or something like that. So St. John's, now when we talk about a river system, whether it's a little creek or a big river like St. John's, we, as scientists and managers, we don't stop at the riverbank. We have to think about the river from the perspective of the drainage basin, the land area off of which water drains to the river, because that has a great influence on the quality of the river. So some of the numbers, St. Johns River is the longest in Florida, 310 miles from the headwaters down near Vero Beach, Fort Pierce, to the river mouth at Mayport. It's the third largest river by basin area in Florida, 8,600 square miles. It's the fifth largest river in Florida by average annual flow. Those are the two ways you describe a river, basin area or average annual flow. About 3.1 billion gallons a day. Three major tributaries, the Ocklawaha, which has its own sub-basin. And you can see the St. Johns, we recognize the upper basin, middle basin, and then the lower basin. And then the two other major tribs are the Econ and the Wekiva, which are both down here in the middle basin. And as we know, it's one of the few north-flowing rivers in really the northern hemisphere. The Seminoles got it right, river of lakes. It's basically a chain of inline lakes going from Blue Cypress Lake in the headwaters through Lake George. You also have some kind of off-channel lakes like Lake Jessup, Crescent Lake over about here or so. So lots of lakes. Geologically, the St. Johns used to be a coastal lagoon, like the current day Indian River Lagoon, Mosquito Lagoon, Banana River, Halifax River, Matanzas River system. And that has some influences, it still has some influences on the river, which I'll come back to in a little bit. The other thing about the St. Johns, and I know Dick's talked about this, is it is literally no topography. It's a very flat river, less than 30 feet total of drop from its headwaters up in Blue Cypress Marsh to the river mouth at the Atlantic, and most of that drop occurs in the upper basin. This brighter red line is mean sea level. The bed of the river intercepts sea level just downstream of Lake Poinsett, which is there. So quite literally, if there were no fresh water in the river, the Atlantic Ocean would come up to here, about 2/3 of the way up the river. So very flat river. And this then creates a very unusual hydrology because of that flatness. The river has a massive tidal reach. Now, tidal doesn't mean salt. The freshwater reach of the river goes from the headwaters roughly down to between Palatka and Green Cove. But this tidal means that every day the river stage, the river level, goes up and down, driven by the Atlantic Ocean tides at the river mouth. And the river is tidal normally up to Astor, just above Lake George. And then from there up to the Lake Monroe outlet, the river flow is still somewhat influenced by tidal damming at high tide. So we call that the Sake reach of the river. So literally half or maybe even a little over half of the river is tidally affected because of that flatness. Now I'll decompose this for you. These data, this is average daily flow for every day of the year from January 1st to December 31st at 8 U.S. Geological Survey river gauging stations where they measure the flow of the river. And it's for this period, 1960 to 2008. Now, the data are somewhat older. These numbers here, the river flow, may have changed somewhat, but what I'm trying to show you is the relative difference between these 8 gauging stations. For rivers in peninsular Florida, the flood period, the high flow period, is that late summer, early fall, partly because that's when most of the rain falls, and partly because that's when we get the tropical events, the tropical storms and hurricanes and such. Now, in North Florida rivers, from the Suwannee west, the high flow season is in the late winter, early spring period. And this northernmost station, St. Johns River at Jacksonville, you can kind of see a little secondary high flow period there. Sort of see it a little bit at St. Johns River at Buffalo Bluff. That's the railroad bridge. And this is due to the fact the cold fronts that come through dump a lot of rain in North Florida, but by the time they get past Gainesville, Ocala, they've dried out. So you can see the southern stations down in the southern part of the river don't have that winter high flow period. So the St. Johns is a little bit like a peninsular river and a little bit the lower part like a North Florida river. Springs are an important part of the St. Johns, as most of us know, and most of those springs are in this middle stretch of the river from about Lake Harney down to Palatka past Lake George. And that has to do with the geomorphology of the area. These rivers, these are the larger springs fed by a large regional groundwater source called the Floridan Aquifer. And this area of hot color here is where the aquifer is closer to the land surface. So that's where the groundwater is able to pop out as springs. As you go north towards Jacksonville or south towards the headwaters, the Florida Dam dips deeper. There's shallower aquifers over it, but they're not under pressure, so you don't get the springs. So most of the springs of the St. John's in this middle reach because of the geomorphology. And currently, we know of 148 named mapped springs. There may be others still yet to be discovered. So some of William's most, I think, compelling prose was when he was describing the springs. And if you can dual read while I talk, because I'm not going to, for the sake of time, read every quote, but he talks about, this is Volusia Blue Spring outside Orange City, a vast fountain boils up with great force. Salt Springs, we'll come back to Salt Springs, and then he also made it over to Manatee Spring on the lower Swanee River, and he also talks about the outflow of the river. The ebullition is astonishing. Basically, he said you couldn't get over the spring vent in a boat because of the outflow of the water would just push you away. And as some of you know, again, some of this prose was so compelling, it inspired Coleridge to write the epic poem Kubla Khan. And those are some of the St. John's River springs. That's mostly what I worked on at St. John's. I was kind of their springs scientist, and I've done work in all of these. The one interesting thing, remember, St. John's used to be a coastal lagoon, so there's actually not too deep under the river corridor a layer of relict ancient seawater. And because of that, a lot of the St. John's River springs are classified as salt springs. They're not as salty as seawater, but they have a much higher mineral content than your more typical calcium bicarbonate spring like Silver Spring or Rainbow Spring. So salt springs, of course, you can almost taste the salt there. Silver Glen, Volusia Blue, Sweetwater, and Juniper Creek, and some of these others in the Middle River are all classified as salt springs, and there are many more. And we'll see what effect that is in a little bit. Both John and William visited Blue Spring. This is Volusia's Blue Spring up near Orange City. And it's interesting that they both describe it, they use this smelled like bilge water, or the washings of a gun barrel. I do black powder shooting, and when you wash the black powder, out of your rifle, that's what it smells like. You get that hydrogen sulfide smell, okay? That's what you're smelling, is hydrogen sulfide. Blue Spring doesn't smell that way now, but evidently it did. And I have another presentation, I talk about the history of springs, where other folks like Andre Michaud, and it's worth reading his book too. His is almost as good as Travels. Andre Michaud in Florida. Andre Michaud, a U.S. Navy survey expedition in 1844, they described Blue Spring as smelling of the sulfur, the hydrogen sulfide, which indicates that at some point in the past, the water coming out came from somewhere else, largely from deeper or from a different source. We also know nowadays a lot of the springs of the St. John's and elsewhere in Florida have dramatically increased levels of a dissolved nitrogen compound called nitrate. Natural background is 0.05 parts per million. And we can see all four of these springs have been down there in the past, even though the data are sketchy, but they're running 10 to 20 times higher than that now. And like Mark was mentioning, these are some of the changes that we've seen going from this macrophyte or submerged grassbed dominated situation to the filamentous algal mats. And the nitrate in part did that. Some of the other ecological resources, wetlands, submerged plant communities, benthic macrovertebrates, fish and wildlife. Wetlands, this is the wetlands mapping that the St. John's River Water Management District does. Basically, we have two kinds, the forested wetlands with trees and shrubs, and then the herbaceous wetlands with grasses and rushes and sawgrass and that kind of thing. Most of the headwaters of the St. John's are dominated by the herbaceous wetlands, your marshes, sloughs, wet prairies, and then you get more of the forested wetlands downriver. Couple of observations that William brought up. Now, this is water hyacinth. Now, that was not there when William came through. That was actually introduced to North America in the St. John's River over here at San Mateo when Mrs. W.F. Fuller dumped some in the river. And you've maybe seen some of the old pictures that at one point, even the lower St. John's out here was bank-to-bank water hyacinths, really badly infested. So it's an exotic and it can take over. For a number of years, this plant here, water lettuce, was classified as an exotic, but William describes vast quantities of water lettuce, that's its scientific name, which a number of folks have been questioning that, and actually nowadays I believe it is considered a native Florida plant, but like some other natives like cattails and Carolina willow, it is invasive, it can take over. But there's one thing that when I read Travels, William laid eyes on the virgin, the old growth cypress forests, okay? Uncut, no logging, that kind of thing. Back then he referred to it as the Cupressus distica. That's its scientific name nowadays. But he was really impressed by the bald cypress swamps. He describes the buttressing, and this is a bald cypress water tupelo swamp on the lower Swanee River, which has been logged, but evidently a long time ago, so it was kind of approaching old growth status. That's a water tupelo, but there's the bald cypress, which we know they have that buttressing at the base there. William mentions that the buttressing was so large in some of the bigger trees that 2 or 3 men could hide within the folds. These guys I work with a lot, the benthic or bottom-dwelling invertebrates, the macroinvertebrates, over 1,000 different kinds, taxa or species that we get in the river. These are the major groups, your snails and clams, segmented worms, aquatic insects, and then your crustaceans, crabs and shrimp and such. On his way up the river, William stopped overnight at Piccolata, and as he was setting up camp, he talks about seeing a large emergence of mayflies. Okay, mayflies, like a lot of aquatic insects, think of mosquitoes, they're aquatic as the young phase, in this case the mayfly nymph, but then they emerge from the water as a flying adult. So he saw a very large emergence of mayflies and talked about that. He called it ephemera. It may be today what we realize is a species of hexagenia, which indicates very good water quality. So the St. John's, historically, very good water quality. Nowadays, however, it's a bit different. This is from an older survey the Water Management District did at different locations. So there's Lake George, St. John's River at Astor, St. John's River at DeLand. These were surveys with a dredge where they collected these benthic invertebrates. The important thing about this graph is generally half or more of the benthic invertebrates collected at all these locations are what we call tolerant or pollution-tolerant taxa. These are mostly some of these guys, the chironomid midges, what some folks call blind mosquitoes, but they're not blind and they're not mosquitoes. But again, as larvae, they live in a little burrow in the river bottom, and they feed on decaying plant and other material in the sediment, and in a sort of a degraded water quality situation, they don't have any other competitors and an adequate food source, so you get these massive nuisance midge emergences when they come out of the water as adults. And if you've lived on or near the river, you've probably experienced these things, particularly after algae blooms. After we have algae blooms on the river, the algae die, and that creates a massive food source, so we get huge population explosions of the larvae, and then we get the nuisance midge emergences. Fishes, very fascinating, extremely diverse fish community, 260 species of fishes. These are the major freshwater groups, the sunfish and bass, minnows and shiners, and your catfish and madtums. These are your anadromous. I'll come back to that in a minute. And these are mostly estuarine marine. Actually, only about 70 of the fish species are freshwater. All the rest are coastal, estuarine or marine. William, of course, described some of the fish communities. He did figures of some of the brim. I think he did, of course, I know he did bluegill. I think he did warmouth, and maybe one other. Red ear, okay, the shellcracker. And then he also described the largemouth bass, which he called trout. Okay, he wasn't an ichthyologist, so he referred to if you ever see him refer to trout in Travels, he's talking about these guys. He's talking about largemouth bass. And I know Dean's talked about this. He stopped and camped with some travel companions in Lake George, and they went and made these fishing lures and put them on a big cane pole, and they were jigging for bass. And so he describes the strike of the largemouth bass, as that thing rises to the lure and that maw opens and just sucks it in. Probably the first really authoritative treatise on the fishes of the St. John's was William McLean's PhD dissertation done at University of Florida in 1955. And he notes that William was the first to describe the Florida subspecies of the largemouth bass, which is endemic to the St. John's River. Although, as I understand, it has been raised in hatcheries now and transplanted all over the place. But Florida had its own unique subspecies of largemouth bass, and it was, that word endemic, found only in the St. John's. And William, of course, talks about the fish. This was at Salt Springs, which he referred to as 6 Mile Springs. So talking about the clarity of the water. And then he describes the fish that he saw. Some of the trout, you know, that's largemouth bass. But look what he gets into, the dreaded stingray, skate. We do have populations of stingray on the St. Johns River. Flounder, spotted bass, which I think those were stripers, striped bass, sheep's head, and ominous drum. So, what we know is the St. John's, because of those salt springs, the salty springs, very similar to the Homosassa River on the Gulf Coast, is noted for this phenomenon of marine invasions, marine fish able to penetrate far upriver. So I know y'all have seen mullet, maybe Atlantic needlefish. These are striped bass at Silver Glen Spring. My two good friends, Mark and Annette Long, took this picture. Most of the stripers these days are stocked. They're grown at the fish hatchery there in Willaca, but historically the St. John's was the southernmost river on the eastern seaboard with a breeding population of striped bass. So some folks say, well, no, they were never in there, they were just stocked. But no, McLean talks about that in his dissertation, the population of striped bass. I don't know if you recognize these guys. I took this picture. That's a pod of tarpon in Blue Spring up outside of Orange City. Like the manatees, they run into the springs because they are a tropical fish, so they don't like cold water. And these are some of the other things. These two guys, the stripers and American shad, think of those are the salmon of the St. John's. The adults live in the ocean, but they run up the rivers to spawn. The St. John's, as well as other East Coast rivers, used to support big commercial fisheries for American shad. But the problem is the shad return to the same river to spawn, so they can very easily be fished out, and many populations were. Although I understand the shad population in St. John's is making a comeback. You can't harvest them even recreationally, but I know a number of folks who during the shad run up in the upper basin around State Road 50, they like to go fishing for them with fly rods, and it's catch and release. Some of the other things, some of the wildlife William described, some of these, I think, he was the first one to introduce the world to these critters, like gopher tortoise, soft-shell turtle, that kind of thing. He does describe a great-crested woodpecker with a white back. That would be ivory-billed, because he also describes a great-crested woodpecker with a black back. That's your pileated woodpecker that we've got. He visited the Seminole village here, and he describes the drying hides of deer, bear, wolf, and what he called tiger, but that would actually be panther. And I have seen Florida panther with sort of a slight tabby sort of pattern, which would make you think tiger. But so those were some of the wildlife. In general, you know, St. John's River was and still is one of the most interesting rivers in Florida, hydrologically and ecologically, but as I've shown you, it's not really the same one that the Bartrams visited, particularly William. There's been degradation of water quality, changes in hydrology, and loss of habitat and wildlife, but we can bring it back. As some of you know, one of the largest projects that the Water Management District has done, and one of the first ones they started was the restoration of that upper St. John's River basin, undo the drainage that had been done, because that was part of the original central and southern Florida flood control, the drainage of the Everglades and such. But the district has, I should say we, I'm retired now, but the district has brought back the upper basin, and snail kites are recovering in that area. So we know we can bring it back with some care. And that's going to do it.
What Joe Floyd is a rather unique individual when it comes to us and the Bartram Symposium. He's going to trace Bartram's land route from Spalding's Lower Store, which was here at Stokes Landing here in Palatka, all the way over to the Alachua Savannah, which is Haynes Prairie Preserve State Park. And he's a longtime resident of Putnam County. He's a property appraiser and an avid Bartramite. He spent years in the woods tracking old Indian and Spanish trails. He found some most incredible old maps that as we find out now, Francis Harper, and if you're a Bartramite, you know that the quintessential edition of Bartram Travels is Francis Harper's Naturalist Edition. So if anybody wants to go home and buy Travels, you want to buy Francis Harper's edition of Travels, the Naturalist Edition, because the front half of it is Travels, just as Bartram wrote it. The second half of it, Francis Harper came down here and spent years tracking Bartram's trail all the way across Florida, all the way across the southeast. Did a very good job of it. But Joe's going to say he was wrong when it comes to the route from here to there.
Hi, I'm Joe Foy. I'm here to talk to you today about William Bartram's overland route from the Lower Store over to Cuskawilla into the Alachua Savannah. And this is Bartram Trail Conference map here, and I was just going to tell you, I grew up in this area here. I've been a surveyor, general contractor. I still am. Property appraiser is what I do now. And I've had the opportunity to go all across this land. My profession has allowed me to go on private land, which, and public land, which gives me the opportunity to see some places that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to see. Anyway,
So this is Harper's version of the route.
This is Francis Harper's version, yes. And I've roamed all over it and I know it well. And anyway, Francis Harper came up with this. I want to give all praise to Francis Harper for what he did. He put a great effort into it. There are things that he didn't know and I disagree with. For instance, we'll try and see if this pointer works here. This route over to Newberry here, I highly disagree with that. That does not match the direction or the allotted time that Bartram had in his narrative. It's a 2-day horse ride there and back. William Bartram would have had to have had a flying horse with jetpacks on its wings to make that work. I mean, it's just impossible. There's a sinkhole over here that he could have seen. He didn't have to go way over here to find one. There's hundreds of them out here. Okay, today's speech here, talk, is really centered around this area over here. Harper was looking for dry, sandy knolls, and so he found one down in this area here that his brother had told him about. Well, he missed the ones that were just right up here by where the store was located. And of course, Francis Harper wasn't from around here. He couldn't go on private land and see this sort of stuff, so I don't want to put him down for missing something that was right behind the tree, but it was. So he found this area down here. It's really impossible for Bartram to have gone this way, but this is where Francis Harper said he went. Now I want to tell you that he wanted to find a road there, so he went to the county appraisers. That was E.W. Watkins and Randall Wells.
When you say he, you mean Harper?
E.W.
Harper.
Not
Bartram.
No, nothing to do with Bartram.
Okay.
No. Harper didn't know Bartram, or he didn't. Anyway, E.W. Watkins was the county appraiser at one time, and so was Randall Wells, and they were good buddies. Anyway, Francis Harper went to talk to them, and they told him about an old road down here. This was kind of a key to Harper's route through here. They found and told him, now these guys, I want to go back here to Watkins and Wells. This is 165 years after Bartram. These guys aren't contemporaries of Bartram, they're contemporaries of Francis Harper. Okay, so they showed him, I'm sure they showed him this map here. This was at their office. I know it was at their office. First time I ever saw this was at their office, long after they were gone, but this is at the county. This is in county records right here. And sure enough, there is an old road here that ran across Deep Creek right there. Well, Harper had his road. Well, there's a problem. It's not old enough. That road was built in the 1820s as a military route running from Palatka, which had been way up here, down to Fort King in Ocala, which is down there. This is the U.S. territorial days, not back in Bartram's time. It was not there. The lower store would have been way back over this way, and there's no road here going that route. There is, as you can see here, this is a big squared out area. That was a Spanish land grant. It's called the Rodman Grant now, but whenever the application for this was made, they showed this swamp, they showed the creek, they didn't show any road here. So that's other evidence that it wasn't there. Okay, there's no road there at Bartram's time. Harper said that Bartram went across Deep Creek here. Well, even if there wasn't a road or some other road was there, it would have been impossible to get across this creek. That there's 1,600 foot of river swamp, deep muck right there. You cannot ride a horse through there. No one could get a horse through there until the Army built a causeway there. This is what Deep Creek looks like. Normally this is flooded by the reservoir, the Rodman Reservoir. This is when they drain it down, goes back to its original banks. It's a lot of water coming down there. This is not some little brook. This is what Francis Harper said was the Little Fine Brook. This is bigger than a lot of rivers in Florida. There's a lot of water coming down this. If you look south from that same point where I'm standing, oh gosh, get back here. I'm gonna tell you my joke. There's chunks of concrete right here and here in going across the creek. That's the old bridge that Harper rode across. It was right there. It's beside where the current bridge is. There is sand along the banks of the creek here that's washed down from upstream. But from where I'm standing right here to that distant tree line over there is 1,350 feet of deep muck. I can't walk across here. I tried to walk about by here, I was up to my knees. You know, it's impossible to cross that area. And now, maybe the reason Harper missed this was because at his time, whenever he came down through and went over the little bridge in his little old 1930s car here, this was all wooded river swamp. And so he might not, you know, he wasn't from around here, so I'm gonna give him some credit here. He didn't know what was behind the trees. And, but anyway, this was all cleared out to make the reservoir. Now, Bartram was traveling with a group of traders. They're riding horses. They're pulling a team of pack horses, and there's a dog running along beside them. There's no way they could get across all that muck. Horses would die trying to cross that. So that is unless they had flying horses with jetpacks on their wings. And then what about the dog? Well, that's the dog. He had a jetpack too. So now, look at the smile on that dog right there. He knows this is a bunch of impossibility. So let me go on to here. I want to point out all this lighter colored area up here is high ground. This is high ground around Palatka. This is the Interlaken area, Hollister right there. This is a lot of high sand hills and dry land. This is the Palatka Hill. And there's a little bit of dry land coming down here to Stokes Landing, which is where the lower store was. All this dark green area here is low land. It's flat woods. There's lots of swamps. It's miserable to get through there without modern roads to do it. Now, maybe Francis Harper didn't really understand this land, but he was telling the story here that Bartram leaves here, goes through all this low land, low. This is 20 miles of miserable wet area to get to what would be the halfway pond over there. That is the worst possible route you could pick to get there. Whenever there's dry land, you got dry land here, you got dry land up here, there's 7 miles of lowland to get through. And not only that, there's an existing road that was up here, just 4.5 miles from Stokes Landing here to right here, there was an existing road. Now that's, this map here is 1864 map, and it shows the Micanopy to Palatka Road. Okay, that had been there a long time. Denny's Roll, who was in this area 10 years or more before Bartram, he wrote about it. He described it. He called it the road to St. Augustine. He said it ran from the Swanee, which was way over there, all the way over to St. Augustine. He said that it crossed the St. Johns River here, right near where he lived at Rollstown. That would be Rollstown right here. The crossing was here. Over 100 years before Bartram, the Spanish had ranches out here. They would have run their cattle to market in St. Augustine using this route. Palatka was known as a cow ford. The Seminole Muskogee, in the Seminole Muskogee language, the term for cow ford is Waka Palatka. Waka means cow, Palatka literally means spill and a pouring. So I guess somehow, you know, cattle spilling and pouring into the river is what they call the cow ford. Bartram described some Seminole that delivered horses to St. Augustine. They probably used the same route. And then after they got the horses delivered, they came down here to the lower store and got all liquored up.
The frolic!
That was the frolic. Anyway, so let's go to the starting point. This is the starting point right here. This is where the lower store is. Right where that tire swing right there is where the lower store was at Stokes Landing. Okay, what evidence do we have that a road went from here up there and tied into that existing road? Well, this is a 1770 map drawn by Joseph Purcell, and he mapped out the old Spanish mission trail, which would have been north of that cattle road that I was showing you. And on that, he has path to lower store written right there. There's a road going down here from the northwest down to the lower store. So there's some evidence that there was a connection. All right, this is an 1833 survey of the Stokes Landing area. They have old store. The old store building was still there. Anyway, they drew the road leaving from the old store area and then heading up northwest. When Denny's Rolls wrote about this in 1764, 10 years before Bartram, he said that he left here and went west northerly. Residents that have lived in this area for many, many generations have used a trail, this trail running here, as a shortcut through the woods to get out to the other hill, Interlochen area, West Putnam. I've used it. This area is mostly just flat woods and with little sandy knolls with scrub on it, or the scrub jay, and all those plants that Bartram described would be. It matches up with what he said. Now, why does it turn north? Well, to connect with that road, and also to miss this, there is a wall of swamp that runs all the way across the west side of the Palatka area and Stokes Landing area. This is Camp Branch Swamp, but this swamp is kind of typical all the way up through Rice Creek Swamp and 9 Mile Swamp area. It's hell to get through. Actually, this is not a creek, that's a road. Show you how. There's cattails growing on the road, lily pads growing on the road. It's rough. You need a swamp buggy to get through there. Now, I'll show you how, see how like walls of swamp running down through here, just miserable to get through. But there's passes through the swamp. That old road I was showing you, the Micanopy to Palaca Road, is now the Hunter Road. But anyway, there's gaps, little passes through the swamp where you can get through. All right, now we need to connect Stokes Landing up here to this road. How do you get through this big old swamp right there? There's a secret. Mays Hammock is a little place there in the middle. Bingo, you can ride right through there. I've been through there many times. In the middle of that, there's a little intermittent stream that on this day it was dry. Some days water's running down it. This would have been the branch that Bartram described in the Fothergill report. He said it had a sandy bottom and it was oozy, muddy, and wet on the sides. That's exactly what's there. That's the little branch going through Mays Hammock. Now, if you come out of Mays Hammock, this would be Mays Hammock here. This is like 8 Mile Swamp here. Here's Camp Branch Swamp here. Big, swamp runs miles and miles. This is the gap through it. This is a 1953 aerial of this, and I wanted to show you. Bartram talks about how it was burnt down annually, and everything was real open in the flatwoods part. In the swamps, it's thick, but you get out in the flatwoods, it's all open. In the 1950s, they still burn it every few years. And you can see how open this is. There's only scattered trees around in it. Okay, you come out of this Mays Hammock here, and actually, you can faintly see the trail running right up like that. People still going through there in the 1950s. I've been through there in the last, about a year ago. Right in this area, after Bartram said he went through this branch, they came to a little sandy ridge. Well, it's real low, but there's sand pines growing on it. It's dry enough for that. He made a deal about in the Travels and the Fothergill report about the Kalmaya flower. He really liked that. This grows right there. You go on, Bartram talked about how nothing grew over 5 foot except for all these tall pine trees because of fire. This is, all the plants match up with Bartram in here, or that. Then the road goes on up close to 8 Mile Road through the Caravelle Conservation Area, ties into the Hunter Road. This would have been the old Micanopy Road where the cattle went through. This is the pass through the swamp. There's a creek flows across here. This is the little brook right here. Bartram said it was 4 to 5 miles out from Stokes Landing. That's exactly 4.5 miles to there. Okay. After that, he talks about going through the glades. Harper was down here looking for the glades. He couldn't find it. This is a map from Harper's time right here. If he had looked at a road map, a highway map, he would have seen the glades. He was down here looking for them, couldn't find them. It says the glades up here. This is the old Hunter Road here. It was a highway. It was Gainesville Highway then. It was a dirt road then. It still is now. Now what Harper did see, that area is called the slash. Well, slash, glade, kind of the same thing. This is what a slash looks like. If you can imagine this being burnt over more, it would have been more grassier. After the bushes grow up, it gets scrubby looking. These slash pines here, they're named for that because they grow in slatting or naturally in slashes. By the way, that's a wild hog trail I was following right there. This is the old road on an 1833 survey map. It's going through scrub. Well, that was scrub swamp. Today, that's the slash, that's the glades. The U.S. National Wetlands Inventory map designates this as a shrub wetland. And this is 9 Mile Swamp. Up here it gets to be called Rice Creek Swamp. You can see these swamps run down. This road came through passes here. It gets to this point, it goes to high ground. You're on good riding from here on out. That point right there is exactly where Bartram said it would be. So you wonder, how did Bartram measure distance that he had traveled? A horse does not have an odometer on it. Okay, a horse walks 2.5, 3 miles per hour. You can count the sun distance and tell how many hours you're out there traveling. And so you use your head, you can calculate how many miles. It's like 7 miles right there. Going up in the high ground now, that road would have run by what is the Hollister Cemetery now. This was established whenever the Micanopy to Palatka Road ran right along beside it here. If you go down along the side of the cemetery down to Sweet Creek, this is where the road would have crossed. Bartram said it went down a hill, crossed the Rapid Creek. This could get quite rapid sometimes. And then it was muddy on the other side. It's exactly like he said it was. Here we go, the road's going on out. We can plot right where it is. Now I want to say all these section lines, this is an 1833 survey. These sectional corners are the same corners surveyors use today to measure. So you can take this map, scale it off, and go to a current map and lay out exactly where this road was at that time. You go through here, Highway 20 is right here now, downtown Interlock, and then it gets out here and rolling hills. Got rolling terrain like Bartram described. There's none of this down there where Harper was looking. There's some little sand hills down there, but nothing like this. And if you go on, the road would run down through here like this. Here's Highway 20. The old road ran, tied in Highway 20, went across the north side of Cowpen Lake. This is Cowpen Lake. It matches up with what would have been Halfway Pond. I want to point out now, this reason it's called Cowpen Lake is because they had a cow pen. This peninsula was the cow pen. When they used to have cattle drives down through here, they'd stop for the night to pin them up on the peninsula and then contend them down through to here in the day. Now Bartram says that they camped on the upper end of the lake beneath the high hills. This is the highest ridge in Putnam County. He mentions that the water flowed like a sheet through the grass. There's marsh right here. There's deep water here, deep water here. There's just marsh here. Said they're beside a cove with sinkholes right here. Now Harper came down the old road here. He was at the lower end of the lake, across the road from the deep swamp, not the high hills. He had it backwards. He stopped at this pond right here, thought it was a sinkhole that Bartram was talking about. It was lake, but Bartram said it was in the cove of the lake, not beside the lake. Now Harper also called that Drummer Pond. Actually, it's Drummond Pond. That's the name of a family that lived out here. I want to point out there's a Bartram Trail map right here at the boat ramp. The campsite would have been up here. I want to show you an aerial of that. The campsite would be here. You can see the marsh out in front of it from that point. There was a rock ledge here. There's sinkholes, bing, bing, bing. There's lots of sinkholes out here. Another little one right there. This lake is plagued with sinkholes. The marsh is in front of this little point right here, beside the cove with sinkholes. Other places, deep water. You don't have the marsh. I want to say this white you see here now, that's sand and kale and clay. Now that's what the rock shelf really was. It's not rock, it's clay. And it was here, it still is here, it's been covered up. Somebody lived there, they put a fabric cloth over it, put beach sand down on top of it, then it's abandoned and grown up in weeds. But this is what the kale and clay looks like there on other parts of the lake. It looks like rock, feels like rock, hard as concrete until it gets wet. This is looking from that point that I would say the camp was at. You can see how it's water flowing through the grass, and then the sinkhole would be right over in back of there. And then they went on up into the hills. Actually, they spent an extra day here Let me just say one more thing here. My little toys here I got. All right. All right. Let me just say one more thing here. He says he went through the burning sandy desert. Well, it's all grown up now. There used to be fire, kept that down. Even when I was younger, a lot of it was more open. It was this tumbleweed-looking rosemary grew on that area, and the tall longleaf pines. It was just sandy up there. And a lot of the hills in Interlachen were just covered out. All this oak scrub was gone. It wasn't there at that time. And he said that he found there's pebbles all over the hill. And there were, people don't see them now because they're covered up with leaf litter, but I just got a, bag full of pebbles here. They're quartz pebbles and sandstone pebbles. And he said he found limestone there. Well, the limestone is not natural, but there are abundant places there where it does lay around the ground. That's because the Indians hauled it up there in the village sites to chip out arrowheads. All right. Anyway, y'all take care. Got a bunch more.
A lot of you might not really appreciate what Joe has gone through in trying to identify where Bartram has gone. You might not understand, why would somebody do that? Why would somebody be interested enough? And I tell you that I felt a kindred spirit with Joe, because I've done the same thing with what Harper has said about the track on the St. Johns River. And I know he got it wrong in a couple of places, and I've preached the gospel, that, well, he really went here. Well, really, who cares? Who cares? He went here, he went there. It was in the corridor. But for a true Bartram aficionado like Joe, like me, and some others, just knowing being able to define where William Bartram actually went, you get a real high. It's quite rewarding when you can read through what he says, and then you can go to a place and you can say, William Bartram was right here. It gives you that connection of place and time with William Bartram. That's just not. It's not something like reading the book. It's a far more rewarding experience. Been there, done that. And so this is the kind of thing that, as Sam and I are going, what we'll be talking about here in a very abbreviated presentation, is developing the Bartram Trail in Florida. But what Joe has done is exactly what we are attempting to get people in other areas, other counties, to do with William Bartram. We've done it here, Joe and me and Sam and others who have gone out and mapped Bartram's travels, and that we can take people out and let them have a Bartram experience by standing in the footsteps of Bartram. We're trying to get people outside of Putnam County to have that same kind of involvement. And so this is what builds a living Bartram Trail, is by getting people like Joe to go out and explain and to map and help us to map and mark the most accurate Bartram Trail that we can make. So Joe, thanks again. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions, grab him and ask him about it. I'm sure he'll love to talk to you.
This information will obviously wind up at the Bartram Trail Conference and all of that kind of stuff, and we will rewrite history because Joe proved it to be so. So thank you again, Joe. It's really cool. All right, so okay, it's building the Bartram Trail in Florida. So that's what Dean and I have been spending a lot of time about. The Bartram Trail in Florida started here as the Bartram Trail in Putnam County. And actually, Ken Mahaffey got this thing started back in 1978 by creating the Bartram Trail Society of Florida. Wow, that was a long time ago. But we revived it in 2019, and after we had built the Bartram Trail here in Putnam County, and the Bartram Trail Conference says this is what we want to do across the southeast United States, exactly what we've done. So let me tell you about us just a minute. This is our mission statement. It's to work to promote the interest in developing public access recreational trails, paddling, hiking, biking, and related activities along the routes taken by John and William through Florida to coordinate a statewide effort to that end. And that's what Dean and I have been doing. I no longer work in Putnam County. I work in a lot of other places, and that's what Dean and I are doing. So here's some of the shots of us here in Putnam County. And Can you imagine how wonderful it has been, what we have done? It really is cool. Do y'all know where this is? Anybody know where this is? Yes. You do? Where you go there today? We went there today, Satsuma Spring, and this is private property, just a beautiful spot. Anybody know where this is? Salt Springs. This is the entrance to Salt Springs. And those are the Bartram signs that we, whoops, ooh, Lordy. What did I? Okay, and those are the signs that we posted all over this place. So we mapped it. Dean drew it. By the way, another pitch for the book. That cartography thing there is in the book, and that guy wrote it. We started creating a kiosk. This is the one for Stokes Landing, and this is the one, again, for Stokes Landing where you describe the fish and the heron and all of those kind of things. And by the way, here's the Spanish map here of the lower store. So this is really cool. So what are we doing now? Well, what we're doing now is we've gotten so we did that. So right now, we have affiliations. So we started here in Putnam County, right? The next county we got to was, Volusia County came up here. So we started this program here in Florida. And then Volusia County came up here. They thought they had the cool stuff just because they had the Battle of Alligator Lagoon. But the really cool stuff happened here in Putnam County. We know that. Until we go over to Alachua County, and they got Paynes Prairie. They think they've got all the cool stuff over there. So that's cool. And then you go up to Nassau County. Hey, Bartram couldn't have got to Palatka if he didn't come through Nassau County. So they think they've got the cool stuff. Duval County's fast asleep, but they've got 17 Bartram sites. And St. Johns County, Bartram slept here. So that's the thing. And his plantation was there. So these are affiliated counties with us now. St. Johns, Duval, and Volusia County, and Alachua County, and obviously Putnam County. And that's the Bartram Trail of Florida. Yes, ma'am.
We do have the failed plantation.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. He failed, yes. And he lived in a mansion, didn't he? Yeah, he lived in what they call a hovel. I don't even know what that was. But a hovel ain't a good place to live. I know that. This is what the Bartram Trail looks like for the Bartram Trail Conference. And so we got a new website. And this is us getting that stuff done. We've had music made. We got all of that. We got a book made. We do river tours, bike rides. And here we are on top of Mount Royal reading Bartram's environmental stewardship prayer. And there's our buddy Billy. And there's the Long Warrior. And there's Job Wiggins. And that's what the Bartram Trail looks like here in Putnam County. So in Volusia County, these are all the Bartram sites that they've identified. They haven't marked them yet, but they do have a really neat Bartram Gardens. And where is it? It's right at Hontoon Island State Park, across the there. It's in the, what's the university, Stetson? Stetson University Aquatic Center is a nice Bartram Gardens. They've got all kind of plant interpretation and Bartram interpretation there. It's really cool. And in Volusia County, they did a lot of good work. This particular kiosk looks a whole lot like the one I showed you from Palatka, right? So the Bartram at Blue Spring kiosk is there, and on the back side of it is a paddling map, which is really cool. And their brochure looks a whole lot like ours. They stole the alligator from us and all, but here's their map of the Bartram Trail along the River of Lake Heritage Corridor. So that's Volusia County. In St. Johns County, you know, we've got all these sites, and there's your plantation right up here. Right up here, right? That's the plantation. But look here. So when Billy went missing, guess where he was? He went missing in 1766, and after the plantation failed, and he came to work for a surveyor, Joe, down here in St. Augustine. And so there are places that actually Billy slept in St. Augustine. At the barracks there, he actually spent time there. The governor's house, he spent time there and all of that. So the Bartram Trail in St. Johns County will be more of a land trail than a water trail. And that's the interesting part. So they only have 4 sites on the St. Johns River, but look what they've got in downtown St. Augustine. It's incredible. So right now, the only Bartram marker that they have is a Bartram marker here in at State Park. That's where they're mining. Oh, that's right. Right, at Shands Bridge, that's where the plantation was up here. Yep, and they've relocated that marker, but it's there. Okay, even after the construction that's coming, they've already replaced it and everything. There was another one that's St. Johns County, and again, see all these spots here. So that's what we tried to denote. All right, in Duval County, they got 17 potential sites, and they are all on the river, including Old Kings Road would be another Bartram site. And so Kingston Plantation, the Trout River, Fort Caroline, Newcastle Plantation, Pottsburg Plantation, Mosh, the monument in the Bartram Monument is actually in the storage room of Mosh. So we got to go get it. Davis Plantation, Marsh Plant, all this is Doctor's Lake, Black Creek. I didn't know that, but it's there, and it sure is. And so Nassau County, they've got 11 sites there. He's actually in 2 places. Goes over to Old Kings Road over there, and the Kings Ferry, and so they've got 3 kiosks going in there, and then the actual Bartram Trail will be over here on Fernandina Beach and all that, and they're really proud of that. This will be the next one published. Okay, it was, and if Amber were here, I would introduce you to her. But it's fun. They've got a really great crowd over there. The garden club is named the Bartram Garden Club, and they've had us up for presentations to their historic museum and all of that. And the story in Nassau County is really, really cool. And so in Alachua County in 1986 established the Bartram Trail. Can you believe it? Sure did. This is the brochure, and so they had it. And the River Styx, Micanopy, Paynes Prairie, just like Joe was talking about. And they had all these locals, and the Kanapaha, and they put up about 3 or 4 markers there. And but you can't find a single one now. They're all gone. The only marker in Alachua County is on the tower there by the lake, and that's it. And so they even mapped it. It's fantastic. We got to go back and rebuild this boat, right? That's what we got to do. And there's Bartram's drawing of the Alachua Savannah. And in there, he describes the cracker horses. He describes the buffalo. He describes the cracker cows. All of that stuff is part of the Alachua Savannah legacy with Bartram. They also have, this is me here. And so you heard somebody talking about Carr Hall, right? That was Archie Carr Hall. That's where Vlett lives, right? Yeah, that's where he is. But they also have Bartram Hall. And so I couldn't resist. It's the only place in the world that you see Carr and Bartram on a sign. Oh, it's cool. So that's about it for me. So thank you all for being here, and I've tried to get out of here as quick as we can, and we've done really well. But I want to thank y'all for being here. This really encourages us to keep on going. And so if the good Lord willing and the river don't rise, we'll be here again on the weekend nearest April the 20th, or Earth Day, that we can be next year. And we'll have some new scholars and stuff like that for y'all to talk about. In the meantime, we got T-shirts, got books, and we really do appreciate y'all being here. And okay, yeah. Okay.
The one thing we have been scolded about, thank you again, as Sam said, for coming. The thing that we have been scolded for omitting to do at every presentation that we ever do is to beg you to please join us. Become members of the Bartram Trail Society of Florida. It's cheap. You'll get on our newsletter. We'll send you out all kinds of cool stuff, and we'll try to involve you in the types of activities we're doing. It is a blast. It's a lot of fun, and we need your help. So please, 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 you can sign up right over here at the table for membership. It's easy. You can actually do it on your cell phone. Sign up for our newsletter. Even if you don't become a member, please register for our newsletter. But we appreciate your being here, but we sure do invite you to join us. Anything else?
All I got.
And with that, we bid you a good evening and thank you.